5. There's 5 whole people waiting for
What?
this, and they've been clamoring it forever, Jamie. They can
They've been
finally
clamoring it
clamoring for it. Did I say
for it.
clamoring it?
You
Yeah.
said clamoring it, but that's
They've
okay.
been clamoring for it, and now they can finally stop. They can finally give us a break.
They
The
can rest.
long-awaited video they have wanted is here. We
Yes, for
will be
years.
talking for
For
years.
years at
Yes.
this point, yeah.
Every time we stream, somebody will inevitably say
Hey,
things.
talk about the Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. I'm like,
Guys,
okay, well,
Frankenstein meets Wolfman win.
listen, we gotta get we gotta watch the OG, what's it called? The origin stories first,
Yeah,
guys.
yeah. You can't watch Avengers without watching all of the other movies that lead up to Avengers, of course.
Seriously. But yes, you asked, we listened.
Here we
It's
are.
time. Hope it was worth the wait. Today, hello. Oh, are we live? It looks like we're live.
So, I
And there's the chat. Do we have the chat thing figured out yet? Are we
I've
still?
I've plugged the widget in, and it is up to the gods to determine whether or not chat has been good enough to appear on screen. Um, it looks
Yeah.
like there's some sinful people in the chat because it's
Mm,
not showing up over Frankenstein's face at the moment.
oh boy. Do you want to give the short version of what the deal is with the chat thing?
Yeah, so YouTube updated some shit, and now our old chat HTML, CSS code nonsense that used to be working just fine. Oh wait, look, there you are. Somebody popped in. So it looks like you have been redeemed. You are here. But YouTube has screwed up some stuff with the CSS in our chat. And now my old version is not working, and there is not really a suitable replacement that I can find that doesn't involve doing a fuckload of work that I honestly just don't really want to do. So we're at the moment I'm
This is
leaving it
your
up
fault. This is a moral failing on your part.
a
That's what
little
I'm
bit.
getting
Well,
from
no,
this.
no, 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 no. See, like this is the same problem that the Frankenstein's monster has, right? Like he can kill 1 million people, but really it's the fault of the guy who called him ugly that one time and didn't want to be his friend. That's really who's at fault, Jamie. That's
Wow,
that's
look at that.
really
Chat on screen. What a time to be alive. Hello, everyone. How's it going? Are you as excited as we are to talk about Frankenstein the Wolfman and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman?
I'm sure excited to talk
Hugh,
about these movies.
Hugh, tell me, why are we talking about these movies today? Explain
Because
yourself.
everybody's been asking for it. Every time, like I said, every time
True.
we stream, people are always like, "Hey, when are you going to talk about Frankenstein meets the Wolfman?" And so we finally decided that this is
Give
the
the people what
time.
they want,
Give
you
them what
know?
they want. For real though, I have the reason is because my girlfriend and I, starting in September, because we wanted to get into the Halloween vibe, we started rereading the Frankenstein novel, and we have a little plan to run, alongside the Disney project. She and I are going back through all those old, macabre 1930s horror movies and reading the books associated with them. So Frankenstein, Invisible Man, Dracula. There is no Wolfman book, which is fortunate because I don't know if I could. I don't know how well I can move
What
through
does
some
that
of them.
mean? Are you trying to diss the Wolfman right now?
No, no, for real. Honestly, The Wolfman is probably my favorite one that I've watched so far.
Honestly, it kind of is.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. But yeah, we perhaps the Wolfman not the most iconic of this group. There's Dracula, there's the Invisible Man. We'll probably get around to those eventually. You have to finish I thought we might talk about Dracula today, but you were like, "No, I want to finish the book."
Yeah, I do. I want to reread. I haven't read it since I was in 8th grade, so I don't. I remember very little except that Keanu Reeves is the main character. So
Kind of. God,
we might bring
Francis
that one in as
Fran-
well. if
Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula is such a strange beast. Uh, it's very like in terms of how much weight he gives each character. It's very odd. It's like who are we following here? This is unusual. It kind of starts with Dracula, which is strange. Anyway, yeah. So no Dracula today. We'll talk about that another time. I'm quite excited for that one because I quite like Dracula the book. I think it's good. Also interesting to me because Dracula, this doesn't spoil much, but the entirety of Dracula, the book, is like newspaper clippings and diary entries. And so it's all, I guess, whatever you'd call the literary equivalent of found footage, found materials. Is there a term for that? Hugh?
Old books,
That
old
doesn't,
novels, they all kind of do that. So, I mean,
well,
Frankenstein does that thing a little bit too. It's all
a little bit, yeah.
presumably a record. It's a record by a sea captain who's listening to Victor Frankenstein explain the story, who then explains the letters and the testimony that he receives from other people in his life, including the monster that he created. So
Yes.
yeah, they all tend to kind of have that sort
Well,
of flair, but
not all of
Dracula.
them. There's got to be a term for this, Hugh. You're the English major. I'm surprised you don't know
Oh,
this.
dude, I don't. Come on.
There's got to, because there's like different types of narrators, like everything you're reading is allegedly real firsthand accounts of like a fictional story. There's got to be a term for that. Maybe the fine people in chat will know. I don't know. It's an interesting device though, and like you said, Frankenstein does that a bit too. I didn't finish Frankenstein the book yet, just hadn't gotten around to it, but I liked what I had read so far.
Yeah,
It's pretty
I've been
interesting.
enjoying it a lot actually. It's kind of reawakened my fascination with some of these older classics of like proto science fiction, I guess you could call them. I'm very excited to finally get through. I've got like how many chapters? Like seven chapters left, and they read pretty quickly, despite like the prose has aged quite nicely, I think. So it's definitely worth a read, and it's a very interesting to see how that book ended up becoming the movie that we're going to talk about today, because it's very different overall. I think
Yes.
most people probably are aware of that at this point, but yeah, the it was funny because when I think I mentioned this to you a little bit before, but when I was reading it and after reading his account of finding some Paradise Lost and Plutarch's parallel lives in a box in the woods, and how a lot of it is his personal adventures of reading these things and trying to self discover who he is. I was thinking like, oh, that's interesting because that would be a difficult thing to film, and then I realized that actually the film version of that is Poor Things,
Yeah,
pretty
that's
much.
basically what Poor Things does. It becomes something of a journey of self-discovery.
Except she
But
reads the Communist Manifesto instead of actual works of powerful literature like Paradise Lost.
yeah, it's interesting. So we're going to talk about Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman together at last. But um, I suppose we should say that we are probably going to spoil them. I don't know if we'll do exactly the same level of breakdown as we did for Gone Girl, say, since we're covering 3 movies. But we are going to go into quite some detail. So before we spoil anything from these, 80, 90-year-old movies, perhaps we should say whether we recommend them first for anyone who hasn't seen them and doesn't want them to be spoiled. So I suppose we'll start with Frankenstein. Hugh, would you recommend people go check out Frankenstein
Yeah,
before listening to our discussion of it?
honestly, yeah. I don't think that I don't think it's not worth a watch. It's very very creative film, like cinematography wise. Like you had mentioned, it's doing a lot of like really cool stuff, especially for 1931.
Oh, I think it's very well directed and
Yeah,
shot. I'm very impressed by it in that
yeah.
regard, honestly, especially for 1931.
Yeah, I would recommend that, and I like honestly, I would recommend Bride of Frankenstein. I think Bride of Frankenstein, I preferred that one a little bit. There's a lot of this. It's the same director, so a lot of the same sort of creative decisions being made. But I think it gives a little,
Bit
and
campier.
it's a little campier, but it gives Karloff a little bit more to work with. One of the things that I definitely remembered from Frankenstein is the scene where he meets the blind man in the cabin. And when I watched the first one and that didn't happen, I was like, wait, what the fuck is going on? And as it turns out, that's from Bride of Frankenstein. So I view those two a little bit more of like Frankenstein Part 1 and 2, because Bride of Frankenstein, the bride herself, is not really a character. She just kind of shows up to act like a bird and scream a couple of times. But I like the ending of Bride of Frankenstein as an ending to the story of Frankenstein. I think it's
Sure.
very strong. Um, and
Really quick, the fine people in chat have said that epistolary is the name of this style or writing device of like
oh, okay, interesting.
first-hand letters and accounts of that sort of thing. So thank you to the fine folks in chat for pointing that out.
Yes, thank you for
You learn something new
achieving
every
more
day.
in a couple of seconds than I managed to do in 4 years of undergraduate English majoring. Oh, college, well worth it, huh? Anyway, so yeah, no, I would definitely recommend Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. I think those two are fun watches, and they're both short. And it's
They're pretty short,
entertaining. They're about like maybe an hour and 15 minutes each. So combined together, you can watch them as like part 1 and 2. Really, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching them. I did also watch. I skipped Son of Frankenstein because that one was 2 hours long, and fuck that. But I did watch Ghost of Frankenstein in addition to all of this, and oh boy, Ghost of Frankenstein.
Yeah, you'll have to fill me in on his adventures before meeting the Wolfman. But yes, the Frankenstein is good. I think it'll be. I mean, we are going to spoil it, but I think if you wanted to stick around, listen to the discussion, and go check it out, you wouldn't be missing a whole lot of a surprise factor. I feel like through cultural osmosis, even if you haven't seen this movie, you know the basic story. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot to spoil. Is I guess
We've
what
all
I'm
seen
getting at.
young Frankenstein. We all know, the definitive version of the adaptation. It's
Yeah, but I think as been mentioned already, it's well directed. James Whale is the guy who directed it, and he does a lot of really fun stuff. A lot of interesting compositions and shots. Some really impressive like tracking shots through rooms that feels way ahead of its time. Um, Very, very impressively directed for 1931, that's for sure. Boris Karloff is pretty iconic as Frankenstein. I would say the story is okay. It's the weakest part for me. The
Yeah.
basic premise that everyone thinks of when they think of Frankenstein is what's interesting about it. The actual execution, how we connect all the dots, and how we flesh out the story, I wouldn't say is especially great. It's still entertaining and fun to watch. That's the gist. I'd say we'll talk more about the details, but I'd recommend it. I think it's worth checking out.
Absolutely. And if the next question is, would you recommend The Wolfman? The answer is hell yes. The Wolfman is really, really fun. I
like The
that.
Wolfman. I think I like The Wolfman more than Frankenstein as a movie. I think it's better executed. There's still some things that I don't quite love, but it's a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. There's a lot going on. I would say the direction is good. Not quite as good as Frankenstein, but there's a lot of good stuff going on. I think it's just a classic, werewolf story. There's some interesting deviations from, I guess, what we consider standard werewolf lore. So that'll be interesting to talk about. But it's just, it's a classic werewolf story, and I think it's well executed. I like it. It's an easy recommendation for me. It's a breezy watch. It's quick, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's another one. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long, so you can just pop that thing on. It's basically an episode of TV. And it tells a good story, and I really like Lon Chaney's performance. I think it's probably of the ones that I've watched, which is I've got the legacy collections of all of these that have just been sitting on my my DVD rack, kind of gathering dust for a while. So of all the ones that I've watched, which are basically just the Frankenstein series and then the Wolfman, the first 2 entries in the Wolfman franchise, the Wolfman's probably my favorite of them so far. I am very excited to finally get back to Dracula and to the Invisible Man and to the Mummy, which I also picked up recently because Boris Karloff plays the original Emotep, which is pretty cool. The
there's a lot of people playing multiple parts.
yes, yeah.
Oh God, what's his name? Dracula guy.
Bela Lugosi
Bela
appears in a
Lugosi
lot of these, and
in all of these
yeah,
movies,
I
almost.
love Bela Lugosi, except as Frankenstein. He kind of sucks as Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's true.
But in one of my favorite parts, actually, about Ghost of Frankenstein is Bela Lugosi as Igor. Bela Lugosi introduced Igor as a character, actually, because I'm sure you know in the original Frankenstein movie, the hunchback, the cruel hunchback who assists Frankenstein, his name is Fritz, not Igor. And Bela Lugosi's Igor character comes in Son of Frankenstein, and he kind of steals every scene he's in. He's really, really fun. He's clearly very talented and having a good time. He sucks as Frankenstein's monster. He's really bad.
He really does. It's unfortunate. To the person who asked, "Wait, are these films old enough to be in the public domain?" No, not yet. In
We
the
got
U.S.,
about what, 5 years, 6 years.
it's 95 years. So Frankenstein will enter the public domain in 2026.
Oh shit! Okay.
If it, unless some of these things are like, oh, it's randomly already in the public domain because they forgot to file or renew copyright or something like that. But
Yeah.
assuming this is a normal case, Frankenstein will become public domain in 2026. Of course, the novel already is in public domain because it's much older. And Guillermo del Toro working on a forthcoming Frankenstein adaptation. That seems to be, from what I've gathered, based on the book, not this movie. Which is it's that interesting thing. The same thing is sort of true of Winnie the Pooh, which is now in the public domain, but Disney's version is not. So only the things that Disney created originally for their adaptation are still protected, like his red shirt, essentially. A couple other small things, I'm sure. But yeah, so you could make a Frankenstein movie right now if you wanted. I think there are just certain details that I think probably the character of Fritz, since that's not his name in the book, is it?
He's not in the book. There
Yeah,
there is
exactly.
no
So
hunchback.
yes, so his character would definitely be copyrighted within the movie. It is, it like the details. You'd have to make sure you're not copying the movie because there are some notable differences. But anyway,
Some
and then the
very
other,
notable differences, actually, and
yes,
interesting
and we'll
ones
talk
too. That we're
all
gonna
about
talk
them.
about.
Yep. The other thing Wing Flanagan mentioned is it goes to show that milking franchises long past their sell-by date is nothing new. Yes, that is definitely a lesson we will learn, especially from
Very
Frankenstein meets the
quickly.
Wolf Man.
So,
It
do I
did
take it
not
that
take
you
them.
would not recommend
No,
Frankenstein
I
meets
would
the
not. The
Wolfman?
movie sucked donkey balls. It's terrible. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman sucks really hard. Now, I wasn't sure what to expect, really. It sounded like a fun, goofy, campy premise. I was hoping it would be sillier.
Yeah,
Because
surprisingly, that first third of the movie, is honestly not awful. I didn't mind the like the follow up Wolfman stuff. Him
yes,
waking
it
up
starts
after
off
4 years.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't mind that stuff. It's literally as soon as he meets Frankenstein's monster that it all starts to spiral very quickly. Um,
Well, there's a couple of problems stacked on top of each other. Problem number one with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman is that Frankenstein doesn't show up until over a third of the way through the movie. Not ideal, I would say. And then also, as soon as we meet him, everything goes to shit. So
yeah, it's not
the
great.
worst. It's the worst of both worlds. First of all, this is the Wolfman meets Frankenstein.
Yes.
It's a small but important difference. Frankenstein is so useless in this movie. So no, I would not recommend this one at all. Don't even bother.
And the reason that I had you watch this one instead of any of the others is because that is the only sequel that was ever made to the Wolfman. The Wolfman does not have his own standalone franchise as the others do. Where with Frankenstein, there's 4 follow-up movies and
Same
then
with the Mummy.
and then a crossover. With the Wolfman, they made one and then jumped straight into using other
team-up
popular
movie.
the team up movies. The follow up to Wolfman meets Frankenstein is called House of Frankenstein, and that features all of the universe. Well, not all of them, because the Invisible Man and the Mummy are not part of it. They were originally supposed to be. It features Dracula, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Boris Karloff returns to the franchise in that one, but he does not play Frankenstein's monster. He plays some completely different character because he was by the end
Man,
of the third one.
the parallels to the MCU are just overwhelmingly
I know
right
at
now.
this point, right? Like Boris Karloff,
Like,
the original Robert Downey Jr.
exactly. Yes, it's a. You know what's funny is that you know what else all those characters return for is
Abbott and
what is it?
Costello.
Yep, that's the one. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
Travion Washington actually just mentioned that in the chat. We are forgetting Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman. They also meet Frankenstein, the Invisible Man. Abbott and Costello basically are where these franchises went to die. The Undertakers of the Universal Monster universe.
That's so funny. The trailer looked like it was more silly. Like I can't tell if it's a silly I'll enjoy or not. If it's like, you know, kind of airplane level goofy, but it looks ridiculous. So maybe it'll be fun. Maybe it'll be more fun than Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, because holy shit, was this a boring movie.
Yeah, it started to put me to sleep right about when he met Frankenstein, and that's not ideal for like the entire title of your movie is called Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. I should not be falling asleep by the time they meet.
Yes, it's less than ideal, we'll say, and like you said, it starts off basically as a direct sequel to the Wolfman, and it's okay, honestly, except for both of these movies both of these franchises, I guess you could say, have this weird habit or this weird pattern where, well, Frankenstein is presumed dead at the end of the first movie, and so is the Wolfman.
Yeah, well, what's even weirder is that this movie is supposedly a follow-up to Ghost of Frankenstein, but it completely rewrites the entire thing. So I'm not like, yeah, there's a lot that
they just have this weird habit of killing them in their first origin story movie because it's classic sort of tragic horror movie ending, and then they're like, just kidding, he's back. The Wolfman one, like they tried a bit harder, I would say, than Frankenstein, because when Frankenstein comes back in The Bride of Frankenstein, it's that classic, well, we didn't necessarily see him die, so he's just back now.
Yeah. Oh, there was a secret well beneath the windmill that we burned down, and he was in there. But Bride of Frankenstein follows it up like almost immediately afterwards, where it's a little more forgivable than what they do with him in this one, or in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Also, I'm noticing like the Abbott and Costello movies. I totally intend to watch these. As I go through them. And if you are also interested, because somebody asked if they have come out on Blu-ray, they have, actually. All of the Legacy collections, which feature all of the movies with all of these classic monsters, are available on Blu-ray, and I would recommend it, honestly. I think it's a lot of fun. Even the bad ones, I think, are, they're short enough that I don't necessarily recommend watching them, but like it's not a complete waste of time necessarily. If you're interested in them, it's not a total waste. So yeah.
Yes, but though, okay, so the short version is we would both recommend Frankenstein and the Wolfman. I think we would both agree that the Wolfman is probably the stronger of the two overall. Oh, yeah. Especially in the story department, I would say. And Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is almost entirely a waste of time, but not quite, maybe. There's like maybe some redeeming qualities to it, but
almost I don't all of which involve the Wolfman, and none of which with Frankenstein.
True. Man, there's just so much to talk about with these, because one of the things that's interesting, I've already seen this in chat, like, have you seen this version of Dracula? Have you seen this version of Frankenstein? Frankenstein, I think you told me this, is confirmed to be like has the most adaptations and appearances of any sort of monster.
It's of any. I think it's of any intellectual property stemming from a single author. Is what that was what I found.
dozens and dozens and dozens,
There are
maybe
over a
even
hundred.
hundreds.
There are over
Yeah.
100 adaptations of Frankenstein, which there are others like Cinderella has a lot. Cinderella and Cinderella type stories are probably the most adapted overall. But since Cinderella is a folk tale, that's a little bit different. This one is specifically from one author, one
One book.
novel spawns all these different adaptations and film versions. So there's something about this fascination with this story that I find really compelling.
Yeah,
And I think you do too.
I think that's the real reason I wanted to talk about it. Frankenstein, it has this captivating place in our cultural consciousness, you could say, that has endured for a long time. It's kind of having its moment again now, I would
Yeah,
say.
there's a lot of. I mean, Poor Things was pretty popular.
Well, I mean, yeah, as popular as a weird, niche, strange, surreal,
Well, yeah, but like
degenerate.
critically acclaimed and very,
Yes,
all that
absolutely.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Maggie Gyllenhaal is remaking a feminist spin on The Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh boy, I can't wait to not watch that. And then, of course, there's Guillermo del Toro's adaptation of the novel Frankenstein. And it's just very interesting to me that this follows his adaptation of Pinocchio because I can't help but notice that there are some themes, sort of like there's a
It's
positive
like
and
poetry;
negative.
they rhyme.
Yes, a positive and negative version of the same general idea of bringing an inanimate thing to life and what
Yeah.
happens as a consequence.
I,
It's interesting to me that he's making both.
Here's
It,
so this is such a clearly prevalent thing. So the edition that I have of Frankenstein the novel is a Barnes and Noble copy from like 2000, early 2000s, and it has discussion questions at the back of them, as some of them do. And
yeah,
the third one is Frankenstein and many derivative books and films have been immensely popular. There is something about this story and its spin offs that gets to us. What is it? The danger of scientific Prometheanism? The pathos of being an outcast? Fear of the dead coming to life and seeking revenge? The monster's character as a marauding embodiment of our unconscious rage? All things that I think are interesting to contemplate, actually, because
yes,
that is something yeah, I
the
told
desire
you while I
to.
was reading it, it reminded me a lot of Jurassic Park, which has some very similar themes.
Yeah,
So,
it's is a desire to usurp the natural order of things, whether you
yeah.
think that's God or just nature itself trying to do it yourself. You know what I mean? There was someone, I can't remember who it was, that talked about Frankenstein being the desire to create life without a woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting things going on. Too much to say in just one sentence. But it is really interesting that it's kind of having this moment again. And I think part of it is this question of like, well, kind of has to do with materialism to me. I think it's like, well, is there anything more than just mere matter? Like that's sort of part of the question with Frankenstein is like, I don't know, what's the difference exactly between something that's been reanimated in this way from mere matter or something that's created naturally, you could say.
Yeah.
Like why isn't this just a person? What makes them, you know what I mean? All that sort of stuff. I feel
Yeah.
like that's the sort of questions I wish Poor Things was more interested in. Poor Things is eventually like, oh, she goes on a journey of self-discovery and becomes a bisexual socialist. I'm like, cool. That's kind of not what I was hoping this would be about, but sure, you go, girl, or whatever. But it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting, and I think the connections. Well, it's interesting that Pinocchio sort of had its own moment a couple years ago, where there were like three different Pinocchio movies all at once. Now, partially, you could argue this is just like, okay, well, Disney is in the throes of remaking a live action version of every animated movie they've ever made, and so Pinocchio is just next on the list. And also, it could be like, oh, well, Guillermo del Toro is working on a Pinocchio movie. We should make ours first. That sort of thing. But I think there's a very real sense that there's something in the air right now that makes people fascinated with certain broad
Hmm.
patterns and stories. And like the fact that like three Pinocchio movies, there's like that Pauly Shore one. I want to say there's even another one. There's also that Lies of P video game, which is kind of like a Dark Soulsy version of Pinocchio. Like all these things kind of happening within a couple years of each other. I just think there's something to it.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. in the air about, AI and, the rise
I
of that kind
yes,
of thing, which, yeah,
I
like,
thought about AI too when I was watching Frankenstein. There's an interesting change between or from like you know if the fantasy before that Frankenstein the character has, it's to like bring things back to life and sort of animate matter and figure out the secrets of life and death in the universe, and then like now the sort of fascination with AI, specifically like artificial consciousness, is like, well, can we create consciousness in a computer? It's almost like separate from, natural organic matter and life forms and stuff like that. Like, can we create it synthetically? It's an interesting change, but is a similar instinct there, I would say.
yeah. No, I think that's very apt comparison, you know? That makes a lot of sense. That there is it's as Jay Jameson in the chat, it's eating at the same table.
Yes.
It's a very clearly something, that a timeless sort of fascination that we have, as
Yeah.
a species. So I'm very excited to talk about that.
Simultaneously timeless, and then it kind of ebbs and flows in a sort of like resurgence of popularity, I
Yeah.
think.
Well,
I
and
think
and
we're, at least for artists, I feel like there's a as artists that people are becoming more and more fascinated with this sort of question. And I think that shows in all the Pinocchio versions that came out recently, and if you include Poor Things and some other things tangentially related to Frankenstein, there was Lisa Frankenstein as well,
yeah.
which looked kind of dumb, but I couldn't help but notice that came out right around the same time as I think, and then there's the two Frankenstein movies that are coming out. Something's in the air, I would say.
Yeah, very much so. And I found it really interesting. The reason that I asked to cover the Wolfman and Frankenstein, and then Wolfman meets Frankenstein at the same time, is because I think there's something in the themes of both that really kind of resonates. Because one of the questions that I was asking is like, if they were going to do a team up movie, right, and Bela Lugosi's on board, why are they not doing like Wolfman meets Dracula first thing? Like,
Yeah.
why aren't they doing something like that? And I think the the regardless of whether or not the movie actually achieves anything with this, the idea of the Wolfman being pretty representative of the duality of human nature and a creature that was created by a very dual, like a very almost bipolar sort of like emotional man, right? And like that
Yeah.
being his god, right? And one of the really interesting things in the book is that like the three books that Frankenstein reads that sort of end up becoming his holy books, you could say, are
Yeah.
these very one of them is Parallel Lives by Plutarch. One of them is the the Sorrows of Werther by Goethe, and the other one is Paradise Lost. And the fact that those three books, which I want to talk about a little bit briefly, the Goethe book, because I was not aware of it until reading this, but it's a really fascinating piece of history. Um, it really seems to like get at the what kind of creature would exist if its god was not the general perceived Christian god, but was this sort of flawed dual natured human being, and what would that look like, right? And I think that there is
Yeah,
something
well, there's
there.
definitely a connection to Frankenstein there.
Yeah,
That's for
exactly,
sure. I can see why
exactly.
she included it.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention, speaking of the sort of what you might think on the surface is an unusual pairing, Frankenstein and the Wolfman. I think you touched on there is something interesting, sort of thematically between the two. Um, what was I going to say? The other thing that's interesting is that it's been mentioned already that Frankenstein, you could argue, is kind of a proto science fiction story. I
Oh,
guess
for sure.
you
Yeah.
you could just call it a science fiction story, but it's sort of in our cultural consciousness. It's most tied to things like Dracula and the Wolfman. None of which are those are both like supernatural. They're not science based. I think the Invisible Man, he creates a potion, right? Like
Yeah.
that's more sciency. That's more grounded in
That's
materialism.
another one that is very much based in. Yeah, like
Yeah.
considered the like the founder or the grandfather of science fiction.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting to me that they pair well together at all, considering one's fundamentally supernatural, the other is the opposite of that. It's grounded in the natural sciences and all that. But they have the same sort of similar, I don't know, for lack of a better term, gothic themes, you might argue.
yeah,
And I think that it's interesting that they fit together like that. I was actually reasonably excited for Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Um, I was hoping I wasn't sure whether it'd be like a team up thing or whether they'd fight more, but it was just a massive disappointment in every respect. But I think it is kind of a fun pairing for those reasons.
yeah. I think there's something there that has not been capitalized on fully that I think might have a like there is potential there, right? And
Yeah.
actually, so another interesting thing about this one, right, is that like as we're talking about all the Frankenstein movies that are being that are coming up, there is a revival of the Wolfman planned for
Yes.
next year by the same director who made Invisible Man with Peggy from Mad Men, which I did not
Yes.
care for that movie very much, but I do find it interesting that he has 5 years later, after a rousing success, right? He's
Yeah, the
decided that
Invisible
his
Man did well. Yeah.
$7 million budget, $144 million box office
Yeah.
for an R-rated
Yeah.
movie. That's not bad at all, man.
That's
Um,
very good actually.
yeah. So 5 years later, he finally decides to come back and make his follow up to that, and he decides on the Wolfman. And then I think it's a really interesting thing,
Yeah.
especially considering that at the same time Frankenstein is very clearly in the in the air, right?
Yes. Well, well, the other thing I guess you could mention is that they tried to jumpstart a whole new cinematic universe based on these movies.
Yeah.
And how did that go? How did that
Well,
go, Hugh?
well, starting with Tom Cruise's The Mummy probably wasn't the move. Um, it's funny though.
Tom
That was not the first time that they tried to do it. I've mentioned this a little bit before. You have never seen The Mummy 1999, have you?
um
With Brendan
actually
Fraser.
I don't think I have.
Okay, I really want to watch that with you at some point
Sure.
because that I love that movie. But back in 1999, at that point, The Mummy that's a reboot of the Boris Karloff one, where Boris Karloff plays the Mummy, Imhotep, and a follow up to that movie. In addition, The Mummy Returns was the second one, but then a follow up to The Mummy Returns was Van Helsing.
Oh,
Where,
okay. I need to stop you only because I love that Van Helsing, the Hugh Jackman one.
yeah,
Oh, I love that movie.
I like that movie
It's
a lot too.
it's so goddamn fun, man.
Yeah.
It's got all the hits. It's got all the
Okay.
people you want in it. Yeah.
If you like that movie, you're gonna fucking love The Mummy 1999. But the original intent of that, because those are Universal movies as well, that was intended to launch a shared universe of the original version of the monster universe
Yes.
with Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell teaming up with Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing and the Frankenstein guy, and they were going to be sort of like a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type thing, but good, you know.
Yeah. That does sound fun because man, I think Van Helsing is that perfect level of camp for
Oh
me.
yeah,
It's so good. Someone mentioned, I think it was, yes, the Council of Karens, great name. That we should watch Ed Wood. I love Ed Wood. Have you seen
I
Ed
have
Wood?
not seen that one. No.
I mean, this is kind of tangentially related, because it's about people making a bad movie. But Ed Wood's fantastic. It's just a great movie. As a side note, we should watch that sometime.
I mean, once we close out this one, that'd be the perfect way to close it out, right? Like,
Yes.
from what I
But yeah,
understand, anyway.
it's interesting to me that it was kind of okay. So what did they call it when they tried to start with Tom Cruise and the Mummy? What did they
The
had a name
Dark
for it?
Universe.
Right.
Yeah.
And they went way out over their skis with that one. It was pretty funny. They had those they had everything planned out. They had all those eggs in that one basket, and then major flop, and they're like, "Ah, never mind, we're not doing this." It is kind of funny because this already was its own cinematic universe back in the day,
Yeah.
and it had a lot of the same problems that these cinematic universes have. where just the writing gets awful.
Oh, it deteriorates quickly,
Very
very
quickly.
quickly.
It's pretty funny. It's pretty funny, all the parallels. It's kind of like we tried to warn you ahead of time and you didn't listen. Um, yeah, it's and of course when the Marvel Cinematic Universe and DC, all those are sort of popping off, or at least attempting to pop off. Of course, they tried to bring these back. It makes total sense. They looked at what they had and they're like, "Oh man, this is already its own cinematic universe. This will be great." And that failed pretty horribly. So now they seem to have the strategy of, okay, we'll let these different filmmakers do whatever they want essentially with these properties. They don't need to connect at all. Maybe secretly they're hoping they can connect them somehow.
Oh,
But with
probably.
the
I mean, I think
with
that's what they
the
were intending from the beginning with these ones.
well, I mean, but like for example, the Invisible Man, that that's sort of like he it's a very modernized version of it, very different in terms of how
Yeah.
the you know it's very different. He's sort of it's clear he was allowed to do whatever he wanted with that, and it seems. Did you watch the teaser for the Wolfman that just dropped?
No, I did not.
It's very vague, and they kind of don't show very much, but it looks like a werewolf movie, so could be interesting. It's definitely modernized. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
The Invisible Man, I was originally kind of like, oh, okay, I like that story. Like, I enjoy that book. Like the original movie, I remember liking that a lot when I watched it. And then it was basically a piece of feminist anti-men nonsense, and I wasn't really feeling it all that much anymore. I was like, oh, I don't like this. I don't like what you've
Yeah,
done here. I
I'm
think
not a huge fan of Lee Winnell, so we'll see what he does with the Wolfman. But
you mean you weren't a fan of Saw 6?
oh, so which one? So he wrote the first one
He
along
wrote a
with
lot of
James
them.
Wan.
Yeah,
Yeah, the first three he was intimately involved with, and of course he acts in the first one.
he
Uh,
directed one of them, I think, too. Or was that
I
Insidious? Maybe. Let me see.
well,
No,
one of
sorry,
those.
he directed Insidious Chapter 3. Yeah, that was his. That
Yeah,
was
I'm not
his.
a fan of his work. Not a fan of
Yeah.
his work,
He
but
also
hey,
directed
maybe
Upgrade, which apparently is a pretty popular.
haven't seen that one,
Yeah,
but
that's
that I
a
know
that's a
that's
Blumhouse one that it did relatively well. 3 million budget, 17 million box office for a kind of obscure movie. That's not terrible.
it's not. I mean, he's had financial success. He deserves credit for that. That's for sure. Saw and Insidious both did pretty darn well, to say the least. Anyway, so that's the overview. Let's jump into Frankenstein,
Yeah, let's do it.
1931. Let's talk about it. Um, I suppose we could just summarize the plot in a nutshell. It's very simple in the broad strokes. Um, there's a scientist who's experimenting with the nature of life and death. We start the movie with him and his assistant grave robbing to steal parts so they can build this they can reanimate these parts and create life,
Yeah, create
usurping the natural order and all that sort of fun stuff.
reanimate the dead. Prove that life is not the domain of God. Basically,
Yes. He even talks about becoming God himself in this. That's clearly a big part of his motivation. And so he does. He creates this monster, and then of course it all goes horribly wrong. It terrorizes him and the local townspeople, and eventually they have to kill it. That's the short version.
That's basically it. I mean, the introduction of the idea that they were looking for a normal brain, and then the Hunchback
Yeah.
Fritz drops the jar because he gets startled by a
Well,
noise.
I wanted to start with the broad strokes at first because the broad strokes are what I quite like. I think it's really solid in outline form. And then when we get to all the specifics, the actual nitty-gritty of how everything comes together, there's kind of some stupid stuff. I would say it's pretty stupid. It starts off really strong in a visual sense. I just really like the way the movie looks in general. He A lot of these things look like they're shot on stages and with all this fog effect, and the way it's lit is very striking, very sort of gothic. I like all the shots that take place in his castle tower where he's doing all these experiments. They have a ton of headroom. They have these very, very high ceilings, like really big sets, all things considered. And the way they're shot, like he has all this gigantic headroom, almost like he's in this weird perversion of a gothic cathedral. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There are these long tracking shots between rooms that really show how massive the sets are. All this sort of stuff that feels very ambitious for its time. But anyway, so in terms of the story, we start off him and his assistant, like they just random townspeople just bury someone in the ground, and they're lurking, waiting for them to leave so they can immediately go steal parts from this body. And it's like, all right, we're off to a great start. We're just jumping in the middle of the story. We don't need to see him have the idea. He's already in the process. I like that. Let's keep things moving. The next thing they do as they're going back towards, their home is they see a man who's been hanged. He's still hanging from the rope. I guess they just left him there for a while. And they're like, we should cut him down and maybe we can steal some parts from him. So they cut him down. And this is the first, I think, kind of silly, stupid thing that happens. They cut down the man who's been hanged, remember? And they're like, oh shit, his neck's broken. We can't use him.
Yeah.
Really? What did you think?
You don't say.
Really? The guy who's
Shit.
been hanged, his neck was broken. Damn.
Damn.
Oh,
Well, damn.
who could have
Wow,
seen
man.
this coming?
Hey, who you never know, right? Sometimes they just suffocate to death and the brain gets damaged that way.
Yeah.
Who could have thunk?
Anyway, so they can't steal the brain from this guy. And so they attend a lecture, a medical lecture, a very kind of funny one, where it's like, and as we entered the scene in the middle of the lecture, towards the very end of the lecture, you could say, and he's like,
Literally towards at the end of the
yeah,
lecture, which
and he's
seems like more like the start of the lecture when you...
yes, and he says, now as you can see here, we have two brains. One is a normal brain. Look at all the curves on it.
And the other is a
Here,
redditor. Check out all how smooth it is.
and the other is a degenerate criminal brain. Look how smooth it is. It doesn't have nearly as many folds. You can clearly see the difference between the normal brain and the criminal brain. Anyway, you can come look at them if you want. That's the end of the lecture. Goodbye.
Here's the part of his brain that really liked Call of Duty.
So this is what I mean about the writing. It's like, oh man, I feel like we could have used another pass at this because everyone else is working pretty hard. The set designer, the cameraman, the director, the actor, they're all doing good work here, but the writing feels very clumsy to me. And so of course, they're because he conveniently leaves the brains out just in random jars on the table for students to come look at as they see fit. They come by later and the brains are still there. They break in and Fritz, the sort of hunchback assistant to Victor Frankenstein, goes in to retrieve the brains. Oh, but of course he's a klutz and he drops
He
the
picks
normal
the normal
brain.
one up and then he hears a noise in the hallway and goes, "Oh shit!" and drops it immediately.
Uh-oh, can't use that one. I
Whoops.
guess we'll have to use the
Fuck it.
criminal
There's only
brain.
one left. Fuck it. Yeah.
And so they grab the criminal brain instead.
Yep.
And I watched that and I'm like, I don't like that. I think that's stupid. Well, I mean, it is
Well,
kind
I'm glad Boogie got a new lease on life. That's all.
Okay, so let's talk about this. For one, there's the whole like you can tell just by looking at the brain whether someone's a criminal or not. And it's like, well, I can understand believing that at the time. Not quite how it works. I would say. But then just the like, oh, I was gonna grab the normal one, but oops, I dropped it. Whoopsie. Now I'm gonna use now we have to use the criminal brain, and then that being the sort of narrative justification for why Frankenstein goes wrong as an experiment, as if they grabbed the normal brain, everything would have been fine. I don't like that at all.
No,
Actually,
that's one of the things where I'm not 100% sure where that came from, right? Because like that doesn't have like they don't even she doesn't even go into whether or not he finds a brain in the book. In the book it's just like he spends all his time picking up, body parts from charnel houses where they keep the dead, and like chop them up and throw them into pits and shit. And he's just like, he pieces them together bit by bit, but he deliberately glazes over how he imbues it with life and what he decides on what to do because he doesn't want the person he's talking to attempt it. So
Yes.
like I don't know where that idea really came from.
It seems like I mean, I can understand how you get there if you have some very stupid, unnuanced views of why people become criminals or why people have these antisocial behaviors, whatever. It's like, oh, they have a bad brain. And so really that's the story is like, oh, well, you're piecing together this monster out of the pieces of people. Oh, and everything's going to go wrong. Well, it makes sense if he just got a bad brain from a bad person. That's why he's bad. It's like, you know what I mean? It feels that stupid, honestly. I
Yeah,
I don't like it because I think it undermines the sort of general idea. The general theme being that, like, well, this guy tries to usurp God and create life himself. And then it goes horribly wrong, of course, as these things do, narratively speaking. And the idea that it's sort of inherent in what he's trying to accomplish that he can't create a life and then it just magically is this great person and all that sort of stuff too. You know, like that it inherently goes wrong because they couldn't possibly have thought of everything. That's sort of the Jurassic Park thing. You try to
yeah,
control something that's way too complicated and chaotic for you to try to control, right? That's a big part of Jurassic Park's message, but also this is sort of like, oh, you think you can be God, but you have no idea essentially what it takes or what will go wrong or what will happen. You don't really know what you're doing, and this is against the natural order, so of course it goes wrong. That's sort of the general
yeah. Well,
thesis.
then the idea of like putting just is unleashing something that had no life into a world where everything is going to be generally appalled by its existence is
Yes.
central to the novel, right? Like that's the
Yes.
entire struggle. And so kind of hand waving that away by being like, this they got a bad brain. This bad brain, that's why it happens. Is a little cheap, I would say, and but it's a strange choice, especially
It
to
is a
take
strange
away
choice.
from the source material that you have. You didn't have to do that. Like the
No.
themes are potent enough without it,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, the general misstep here is because now it implies that if he just got the normal brain, everything would have been fine, or
Yeah.
everything would have been better because he wouldn't. He wouldn't, for example, toss a little girl into the lake, which is the best part of the movie, and it's not even close. I can't wait to talk more about it. You
Yeah,
know,
funnily
like
enough,
the
in Son of Frankenstein too, the plot involves one of Victor Frankenstein's three children who have not existed until the movie starts. Basically offering to give the monster a new brain instead of the bad brain that he received in
that's
the first
just
movie.
it's. I hate that. I hate that detail. It's totally unnecessary.
And what's even fucking wilder is that they decide that in that movie in Ghost of Frankenstein they decide that the monster wants like it hears this and then it goes and kidnaps a little girl because it wants her brain instead. So like doing the full Michael Jackson.
Oh my goodness.
It's
Yeah, so
bizarre.
I think that's a misstep. You change that, they just get a brain from this sort of lecture. They steal one, and it's not labeled criminal and or normal. It's just a brain. That would work just fine. Um, it, and so from there, they go back to the castle, and then we get, I would say, some of the most boring stuff in the movie. Like we have to introduce his love interest, and we have to introduce his family back home. Though I will say, I do quite love the performance of his father, Victor Frankenstein's father,
Baron
Baron Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Yes, he has this very
Oh, yes, what? What's this now?
yeah,
What?
exactly that. That's the way he talks, and so he's quite a delight every time he's on screen, I would say. But
Well,
we're all,
every time
it,
until the ending, probably. Like,
well, yes. Spoiler alert: the ending of this movie sucks. There's this final
that's
scene
a
that
running theme with some of these, actually.
I would say, yeah, we'll talk all about it. But now we have to do stuff like, oh, he's off broadly similar to the novel. He's away at university doing all these experiments. It's not a university in this movie, but he's kind of secluded, or he's become sort of a recluse from his family and the rest of the world. He's like holed up in this castle tower conducting these experiments, and then his family's trying to be like, hey, we haven't heard from you in a while. Are we still getting married? And what's going on? All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
um, and
go
he
ahead.
also like he has that whole thing where like he they've decided to come and like see what's up with him, and he doesn't want to he doesn't want to be visited, he doesn't want to be intruded upon, similar to what he's doing in the novel, right? Like he isolates himself at universities or at the university from his family, and he doesn't write to them because he's just so absorbed in this process, but he's
This
sort of like
obsession he
this
has. Yeah.
obsession, but he's ashamed by the obsession,
Yeah.
so he doesn't want to let them know. And immediately after he creates the life in the novel, he kind of immediately feels this post nut clarity, where he's like, oh shit, what have I done? And he
Yeah.
immediately sort of like runs away, and he's too afraid to tell anybody what he's pulled off here.
Yeah.
uh,
And I
um,
and I and I quite like that. They're just like they're like whiffs of that here. It's not as detailed as it is in the book, but I like that idea that he's obsessed with this, but simultaneously part of him knows that
yeah,
this
he
is sort of
knows
a
that there's something
dark
fucked up
obsession.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why he's ashamed of it, you know. And I quite like the idea. It's mentioned explicitly in the book, if I remember correctly, that he took great pains to make it handsome, to get faces and body parts with like the right,
He
features
does it
and
to make it large, because the bigger
oh
it
on.
is, the easier it is to
Yes, there's that, but if I remember correctly, he specifically says something to the effect of he tries to make it handsome, but then when he sees the whole thing together, it's like all jaundiced and looks like it's essentially a dead body that's come back to life. And like, despite all his efforts to make it something beautiful, it isn't.
I don't remember that.
You don't? Are you sure? I feel like that's part of it, right? I feel like that's part of it.
I
I'm asserting that it's true because I remember reading that.
Okay, I mean, I did just read it, and I don't remember seeing it, but yeah, that's fine. We can.
Well, I don't know where. Maybe it's from a different adaptation that I'm remembering, but there's something like that he's like trying. He's not trying to make it this hideous thing, but then like when he sees it come to life, he's like, "Oh God, this is monstrous. Why did I do this?" He has that post nut clarity, as you mentioned, and he like immediately decides like, "Oh, this was a horrible mistake." In this version, he's trying to brush off his family, so there's clearly some sense that he has that like he doesn't want them involved, he doesn't want them seeing what he's working on. It's like there's some hint of shame and secrecy there. And then he gets the scene where, using the electricity that he channels from the tower, he brings it to life. He's like, oh my God, it's alive, it's
It's
alive.
alive, but he lets them all see it too in the movie version, which
Yes.
is nice. Like he brings them in there to kind of be like, "Oh, look at me, I'm not crazy. Look at this," and then they see it, and it's kind of like, alrighty then."
Yeah. And so
Love it. I do really like the Doctor's performance too.
yeah, he's
He's
good.
very good.
Remind
Uh,
me what his name is, if you can.
I am about to. It is Colin Clive.
Yes, he's good in this. Exhumed Legume says, I guess they needed the wrong brain to make the monster dumb. From what I've heard, he's a rather intelligent chap in the novel.
He he
Um,
he learns very quickly in the novel. Yeah, like he's kind
yes.
of like a blank slate, and he ends up hiding in the cottage of. This is one of the parts of the book that kind of like I was like, I'm getting a little bored reading this kind of stuff, right? Because it's like he spends a very long time relating the story of the peasants whose cottage he's hiding in for a couple of years, until he can learn how to speak and read French enough to read to read Paradise Lost and Sorrows of Werther and Plutarch. But he finds those three books and immediately reads them and like absorbs them like
Yeah.
a child, or like, basically like a child who's never read anything before, right? Like it's like the foundation of his personality, or those three novels or
Yeah.
works. And
He is essentially kind of a blank slate, kind of in the
yeah,
same way Bella is in Poor Things. I would say that's
yeah,
one of the things that until it has the same problem for me. Like later in the story, it's like, oh, we're doing all this weird stuff that wasn't as interesting as what I thought the main story would be. But at least what I liked about Poor Things in the beginning was like, she's not dumb. She just has to like grow up very quickly. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like she has to like learn how to use her body the way a toddler might, and like all those sort of basic things. Like I think that they make him dumb in this is not necessarily a problem nor a justification. I think narratively for we have to make a reason for him to be dumb. Let's give him a dumb criminal brain. Because it could just as easily be they get a normal brain, and then the monster they create isn't at all what they hoped it would be, and it's just this thing that growls at people. Yeah, like you don't need a good reason for that to
yeah.
assume that, like, oh, this experiment didn't work the way I thought it might.
Yeah, I think, like honestly, it may be going along with the science as it was understood at the time, but I agree, it's unnecessary. You don't need it as a justification. You can just do it. You don't
Yeah,
have to. You don't have to add that stuff in.
yeah. I mean,
But
the idea that like,
not
oh,
like
they're
they would
looking
have
at
known that at the time, right? So like,
yeah,
that's fine.
they're looking at the brains and thinking like, oh, you can tell this is a normal brain because of these features that you can look at and touch. Like, I'm not surprised that people at the time believed that in the logic of this story. It's more so that like they felt they should add that to the story that didn't have it from the beginning.
Yeah.
That's an odd choice because I do think it undermines
I
the
mean, he
general
gets brain
theme.
damage enough from reading the Sorrows of Werther, so it's fair. So, real quick to sum up what that book is, so that we understand sort of like what the foundation of the monster's personality sort of comes from. The Sorrows of Werther by Goethe is it's a novel. It's his first novel that really launched him into popularity. He ended up becoming quite famous throughout the years. But
Of course.
that book is about a guy who's caught in a love triangle between he's in love with this girl named Charlotte, who is engaged to a guy who's 11 years older than her, and he sort of like starts hanging out with them and befriending them, and he is so distraught by doing this, by his unrequited love, that he ends up shooting himself in the head and taking several hours to die, and then he's buried alone between two trees that he romanticized, and nobody comes to his funeral, not even the two people who he was involved with. Um, that book was so immensely popular in Europe at the time that Napoleon carried it around in his pocket when he went to Egypt, and that it inspired a slew of copycat suicides from young men across the continent, that so much so that individual states started banning it from publication because they were
Interesting.
worried about what was happening to the youth at the time. It inspired fashion trends. People started dressing like the characters described in the novel. So this and by the end of his life, Goethe had actually disavowed this book. He had distanced himself from it, and he sort of regretted having, that
Yeah,
having been what
famously
launched
he
him.
said, "Oof, that was kind of cringe actually. Sorry
Yeah,
about that."
sorry guys. Pick Me was popular then. I didn't mean to I didn't mean to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty famously, he was like, no. He wrote a poem eventually about like somebody pooping on Werther's grave, which is really fucking funny.
Listen,
um,
we all went through that phase. All right.
yeah,
It
everybody had
happens.
it. Everybody had that, but most people. But yeah, so that is one of the foundational texts that the monster in the novel bases his personality on, right? Is this Sturm und Drang, very just like bipolar pick me novel, right? Where the world is against him, and like like
Yeah.
he'll never have love. And like the one crush he had on the girl who was dating the jock, is the
Hmm.
end of the world for him. That is one of the three foundational texts that the monster bases himself on. You don't necessarily have to include that specifically, but
No.
you can do that without having the literary device of just, oh well, he has a criminal brain. Is Like,
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I suppose one of the biggest differences that you've kind of highlighted there is that in this movie, he's kind of an aggressive monster
yes,
who growls at people, who throws people around and stuff like that. He kind of, the very first time we see him actually hurt or kill someone, it's because they were like torturing him. That's with like
Fritz,
Fritz,
yeah.
right? And then later, there's a little girl. Well, I can't wait to talk more about that scene. That one's like a weird sort of curiosity. It's probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. And then later, he's just kind of showing up to like growl and terrorize
Ah.
this peaceful wedding that's happening. He's more of an unthinking monster in this than he is in the book.
Or
The
in Bride
book,
of Frankenstein, actually, which is one
or
of the
yeah, they
reasons
sort of
why I really liked the Bride of Frankenstein. Uh,
yeah, because I think like wanting to continue the story with him, you kind of have to humanize him a bit more, make him more of a tragic figure who's like an outcast and like well, one of the things that's interesting, so I haven't read the entirety of the book yet, but I have like looked at the synopsis. Let me know if I get any of this wrong, but it seems like one of the things that the book does is like people are disgusted by him when they see him. They're terrified by him because he's this big, like 8 or 9 foot tall,
he's like
hideous,
an
like
yeah, 8 or 9 feet,
walking corpse.
like stitched together from a bunch of corpses. He looks like he's
He's
dead.
jaundiced and
Yeah.
diseased, yeah. And like he's I think at one point there's this like village, peasant village or whatever, and like he's watching them and like he's sort of like seeing himself in them, and then when they see him, they're like, "Oh God." And so like people are like repulsed by him, and then he becomes very embittered at people because of that,
Yes, that
right?
is exactly how it works. So like that scene that you're describing, he's hiding in the walls of a group of French aristocrats who've been reduced to peasantry because of the government. Basically, there's a lot of anti monarchy stuff in the book. All thumbs up, good job, Mary. You did a good one. But he ends up revealing himself to the blind father, who is sort of like he treats him like like a person because he can't see him. But he's hoping to entreat the father to sort of advocate on his behalf with his children and their families because he wants a friend. And in the middle of him trying to talk to the father, the family comes home and sees him, and they basically just see a corpse, a giant corpse sitting there with the father, and they freak out and they
As you
leave,
would.
as you might. And he gets really upset and runs away because they're like, "Get the fuck out of here, you freak!" And he goes, "No, no," and runs off. And then goes, you know what? Maybe I was a little too. Like, he goes off and he has this passage where he's just like, "I wanted to kill all of humanity." But you know what? Maybe I overreacted. It's actually kind of normal that they might think this. I should
Yeah.
have been more understanding. Maybe I'll go back and I'll just try, in little bits to sort of just like show them that I'm not so bad a guy. And he gets back there and he finds out that they've immediately decided to sell the house and leave. And so he gets so mad that he burns the house down.
Yeah. So that's sort of what's interesting about it in the novel that doesn't come across here, and I think Poor Things almost comes closer, but then fails and almost is worse for it than in the movie that we're talking about today that doesn't even bother trying to humanize him. So in that original novel, it's like you can understand in a sense that he's something of a tragic figure. He didn't ask for any of this. He didn't ask to be hideous or whatever. But like when people have that reaction to him, they're like, it's totally understandable that they would see him as a monster anyway. But then, like, where he really goes wrong, in a sense, and why he's a monster and not just this poor victim, is that he immediately sort of turns on all of humanity and wants to go destroy his creator and everything. He becomes incredibly,
Exactly.
like,
Yes.
bitter and resentful
And
and
it doesn't take
murderous.
much at all. Like there's
No.
a scene in the novel where so after this issue with the peasants and their cabin has gone awry, he decides that he's going to go to Geneva, which is where Frankenstein is from originally in the book.
Yeah.
And he gets there and he sees a child who ends up being Frankenstein's youngest brother, just like playing out in a meadow. And he goes, "Oh, that kid probably, he's young. I could probably teach him to, appreciate me, and, that I'm not so bad, right? And so he goes out
Hmm.
to talk to the kid, and the kid sees him and immediately freaks out because, there's a giant
Yes,
corpse coming. The kid's like,
as you
and,
would.
and the kid's like, "You're an ogre. You're gonna eat me." And he goes, "No, listen to me, child. Don't you understand what I'm saying?" And you have to come with me now. And he goes, "My father will be mad at you if you eat me." He goes, "You have no father anymore. You're coming with me." And the kid says, "No, my father is, Baron Frankenstein." And immediately he goes, "Oh, you're a Frankenstein. Well, then you must be related to my creator, and that means I'm gonna fucking kill you." And he strangles the kid, like on the heath, and then steals a locket with a picture of his mother in it. And then he
Mhm.
runs to a barn where one of the Frankenstein's servants is sleeping because she's been out looking for the kid who's gone missing. And he looks at her. He goes, "Oh, she's so pretty. Wow, I wish she would wake up and say hi to me." And then he goes, "Oh, wait, if she woke up and said hi to me, she'd think I'm ugly. Oh, what a bitch. I'm going to frame her for murder." And so he puts the locket in her pocket and leaves. And she ends up getting executed for the murder of the kid.
Yeah.
Which is
Yes.
like, yeah, like that's
Which is
why
all
he's a
just
monster. This is
yes.
actually monstrous behavior.
Yes. And there's something interesting there that like everything kind of stems from his sort of like resentment at his at existence itself, you know, in a sense, and that he like tries and then he wants to turn on his creator and he's like he wants to do away with all of humanity and all that sort of stuff. And that's why he's a monster. And you can still have that sort of like in a sense this is tragic, a tragic irony that this is what happens to him. But his real sin and what makes him a monster is kind of becoming so murderously resentful.
and
Meanwhile,
and taking no blame for it is the final scene of the
yes,
novel when the sea captain who has rescued Frankenstein, and then watched him die, confronts the monster. He says something like, you burn down a village and then you stand amongst the ruins and bemoan its loss, right? Like, you
yeah,
hypocritical fiend." And he says something like, the monster's response is like, "Why do you hate me? Why don't you hate the peasant who wouldn't let me talk to his father? Why don't you hate, the kid who screeched at me and was unreceptive to my reason and logic? Why don't you hate the girl who was so pretty but wouldn't look at me as if I was one of her own?" All that kind of
yeah.
stuff. It was like, yeah, that's the monstrous behavior.
Yeah.
That's where it comes in. Is like, he
What's
doesn't.
kind of funny is it's not funny necessarily, but like that's Poor Things. Poor Things is basically the movie is like, yes, it's the world's fault for not understanding and aligning itself to this monster. It's a different kind of monster, but it's the same thing. The whole thing is like, oh, what if, the monster is actually right and we all need to learn to be more like her? Like that's the really kind of gross subversion that I really didn't like in Poor Things.
Yeah.
It didn't have that same sort of thing that the original story has, where it's like, no, this is actually a monster. This is actually something
Yeah.
monstrous.
It
Like
it's interesting because, like, a lot of what Mary Shelley is writing about is a response, or like, she's very steeped in the romantic culture as a response to the Industrial Revolution, right? But
yeah,
one of the things that I find very fascinating about this is that her husband was very, like, Percy Shelley was very atheistic at a time when that was not a common thing to be. And
yeah,
she writes a story where humanity essentially replaces God with itself and everything goes completely awry, right?
yeah,
That's not an accident that she did that, right?
no,
Like, this is an imagination of what, like, human beings at the time, religious human beings at the time believed they were created in the image of a perfect being, which is inherently different than a monster who understands that he was created in the image by the hands of beings that he realizes fully are imperfect, right?
yeah,
Like, there is something very powerful about looking at this and being like, this is what happens when imperfect things create something in their own image, right?
and think they create themselves. They
Yeah,
think they're self-creating beings and all that. Yeah,
yeah.
oh, definitely. Really
And
quick, Kevo
that's a
said,
point that I think sorry, that's a point that I think gets missed a lot in further interpretations, where it's always, it's basically, there's a lot of sympathy for the monster, and I think a lot of that is driven in part by the movies that, because in the movie it's really like none of that's really there. It's not really his fault, right? It's just like, oh, it's an
Yeah.
abnormal brain, but maybe if he had a friend, then
Maybe if they didn't torture him, as we'll
yeah,
see in a minute. Yeah.
exactly. But I don't think
He,
that that's really what she was getting at in the novel, right? Like
no.
that's not that there.
It's really not what she was getting at, I would say. But I would say this sort of sidesteps a lot of that. I think some for the worse, but also it's just like I think I mean I certainly hate the changes less than I hate the change in Poor Things. This he's more of an unthinking beast. He's more animalistic, right?
Yeah.
It's almost more like the idea is almost I mean he literally growls at people. And there's there's something more like man tries to create its own life and but like cannot create a sort of higher life you might say in like a human something intelligent compassionate thinking all that sort of stuff. It just creates this beast essentially.
Yeah.
Like there's something to that idea. It's not quite as strong as the original story, but it does sort of
Yeah,
sidestep a
it's not
lot of
bad.
those deeper issues.
Yeah, it's not bad, but I do really like I really like this book. I mean, it's really good.
Yeah. Council of Karen says so. The book was an "fu" to her husband. Talk about passive aggressive. Well, I
Yet
think she
another
was
point
totally
proving.
right to write that "fu" to her husband. Percy Shelley's a cunt. The more you look into him and Lord Byron, a lot of people she was surrounded by at the time, not good people at all.
No,
Not
not really.
in the slightest.
Really,
And I
really incredible too. At the end of the book, Frankenstein, sails off on an ice raft into the Arctic Ocean, into the darkness, like a growing storm in the Arctic Ocean. Really interesting to note that her husband died doing something very similar. He ordered himself like his own boat to be built, and he and two other people who had no experience of seamanship went out went out in the ocean in a storm and ended up drowning. Um, really interesting.
interesting parallels,
Very
yes.
yeah, like uncanny, I would say, because I don't think she intended for that to be, because that was like several years before it was published, but or no, that was several years after the book was published. So I don't think it was intended to be that, but it is interesting that that happened. That it ended up
Yes.
things ended up that way.
Symbolism happens. Kevo says, "Oh, so the monster was a Discord mod." Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, tried to kidnap a child, upset by pretty women. Yeah,
Blame society for not accepting him instead of taking any accountability for his own monstrous behavior. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
essentially.
In a nutshell.
Spends all his time reading a lot of philosophy without.
Also, I quite like that you described it as experience with seamanship.
Mhm.
That's just that's
Indeed,
funny to me.
indeed.
So, as been alluded to already, he creates the monster. He shows it off. There's this one scene where he's like trying to teach it basic commands. Obviously, he can't speak English yet, but he's like sit and all these sort of things. He's trying to teach it basic things, and then things start to go wrong. Principally because Fritz, in his own time, Fritz being the sort of hunchbacked assistant to Victor Frankenstein, is like going down into the dungeon where they're keeping it and like torturing it.
Yeah, for like no reason. I mean, He's ugly on the inside and out. That's basically.
That's sort of the gist. Yeah, he's like being very cruel to the monster. And then the monster eventually, there's this big hullabaloo and it manages to escape. At which point, Victor Frankenstein is like, whew, man, I'm so glad that ordeal is over. I'm just going to move on with my life as if nothing happened now, which is an interesting choice. I think what the book does is a bit stronger in that, like, immediately he sees this and he's horrified by the thing he's done and then tries to, like, and then it escapes and he's like, oh, maybe
Well,
it was all.
yeah. I mean, yeah. He runs away from it, and then when he goes back, he's like, "Oh, it's not here. Ooh, boy. Maybe it was all a dream."
Yeah. Well, I just think that's a bit more interesting because
Yeah.
in this he's like really proud of it at first, and then it like there's a big hullabaloo and it disappears, and he's like, oh well, I guess that's done now. I'm gonna go. Yeah, I just didn't quite understand what changed for him there exactly, except for that like, oh, is this thing is a threat now. It's maybe dangerous. But anyway, he has that change of heart, and then he's like, "All right, wife, I'm gonna marry you for real now. Let's prepare to have our wedding." And so they're having all the preparations for the wedding. Meanwhile, the monster is roaming about in the countryside, and here comes the best scene in the movie. He stumbles across this little girl, and this little girl's like, "Hello." She's not horrified by him. She's like, she just immediately wants to sort of play with him. She's like tossing little flowers into the water. They're right up against like a lake or a river, whatever it is. She's tossing flowers into the water, and they're floating, and they're like, remarking on that. And then the monster picks up the girl and tosses her into the water, almost as if he's going, "Huh, that floated. Will this float?" And he picks up the girl and just tosses her into the water. It's so funny.
Very Lenny and the Rabbit, kind of.
Yes. And I quite like that as a detail. It's almost more of a curiosity. It's not malicious at all. And that seems to be like, that's what I was hoping I'd get more of in this movie, instead of just him growling and attacking people. This is a bit more like, you can understand that like he doesn't know what he's doing here, and there's something tragic about it. But unfortunately, the girl drowns. So not great.
And he runs away, like he realizes he's done something wrong. Yeah, like a child would, right? Like when he like reached in to grab a cookie out of the jar, and then the cookie jar broke. Like he runs away and hides. You know?
Yes.
And
like,
that's the strongest character development that we're gonna get for him in this.
Yes, I think it's the best part of the movie. A, because it's very funny and kind of slapsticky the way it happens. It comes as a total surprise. You don't know what's about to happen. And then there's a great scene. I quite like the way it's shot, where the father of the girl is carrying her body into the town while everyone else is preparing for the merriment and festivities for the wedding. He's bringing his daughter.
I love really that scene, shot. Dude. When when it's tracking it like that, I was like, damn, dude, for 1931. I think this is pre-code, so it's a little bit like it's a little more acceptable to do shit like this. But when that tracking shot comes in and he's walking through with the drowned corpse of his daughter, I was like, God damn, that's good. That's a great scene.
It is
very
a great scene.
Well filmed.
One of the things I like about it, besides all the great camera work and everything, is that he obviously, the look on his face is, distraught and everything, but you can see all these people that he's passing who are in the midst of merriment and joy and all that sort of stuff. Like, you can see their faces turn once they realize what's happening here.
Yeah.
It's really nice to see all the reactions kind of change as he's walking past them. It's good stuff. And then, of course, he arrives and the crowd has gathered, and they're like, "What the heck?" And it's like, and I forget what he says immediately, but like, he shows that like, I forget how does it come up that they know that it's the monster doing this? I can't remember.
Oh,
you remember, because they'll eventually go hunting for whatever did this, but I can't remember what they say in the moment, like immediately.
I don't.
Did the father see this happen? I can't remember.
No, he didn't.
I don't think he did.
He
so
did.
He just found the body.
The reason that she's alone and picking flowers and wants to play with Frankenstein or with the monster is because he left to go gather firewood or something like that, and he was like, "Just stay here, do that." And he comes in and she goes, "Will you play with me?" And he's game because he's he's,
and then, like, as been mentioned, he's something of a scientist at heart. He's like, "Do you float?"
Yeah.
Oh, apparently
I'm
you do
something
not.
of a scientist myself.
I'll note that for next time. Little girls don't float very well, especially if they can't swim.
Yeah, well, he also like kind of grabs her in a really awkward position, and you hear her go like, "You're hurting me."
Yeah.
And like, so you don't know exactly what he did, but like, he used too much strength and broke her arm or something like that.
Yeah, something of that sort. So he throws her in the water, and then the dad brings the body back, and they're like, "What did this? We should go looking for whoever did this." I think Frankenstein himself theorizes that it might have been the monster, obviously, that he created, that is loose. So he goes looking for it, and then a mob comes to find him. I think like Frankenstein's ahead of the mob himself.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
So like, I think what happens is like they just think that somebody drowned his daughter, right? Like she was thrown into the water, and and Frankenstein realizes, he in the back of he's like, "Oh shit, that's my bad, guys. I should probably go That might be the
Find
thing.
this thing, yeah.
Yeah, I should probably go find this thing. So he gets ahead of it, and they're all looking out for. They're out there looking for
A
whatever did it,
murderer.
a
Yeah.
murderer. Yeah,
As Jay Jameson points out, well, he only did one test. He just needs more data. Exactly. He needs a control sample and all that sort of stuff. He's learning. All right. You
he's
can't
trying,
blame a
man.
guy. This is one test. All right.
This
So
version of him didn't read Plutarch. He doesn't know.
Look, he doesn't know that you need to go to an ethics board to approve these sort of tests on human subjects. All right. He didn't know. All right. He's just trying to learn for the betterment of all
He
human
misinterpreted
knowledge.
the rules.
Yes.
So yeah,
then,
they go looking. It's just a 15-year-old Wakandan scientist would have figured it out instantly. That's pretty good. So they go looking for him out in the woods and the crags, the mountainous crags, the passes, and he ends up finding Dr. Frankenstein, and they scrap a little bit. They get in a bit of a fight, and he beats him up and takes him to the windmill, and they all end up figuring out that he's in the windmill. And this is the famous the windmill scene. Famous, but like honestly, I think the Van Helsing version of the windmill scene is a little bit more potent. I like that one. I like that a lot, actually. In this one, they're in the windmill, and they fight a little bit. They set it on fire, and he ends up throwing Dr. Frankenstein off the windmill. He ragdolls very hard onto one of the blades of the windmill, and when I was watching that, I was like, "Oh shit, boy broke his back. He's done." Right? Like he flops off. You can see it. Like they show it in the trailer too. He flops off the end of the windmill, which is like it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty clear that it's a dummy, but it looks pretty good. For the time.
Are you talking about the rag doll?
The ragdoll off the top of the windmill. Like when he hits that windmill, I was like, oof, damn.
Yeah. It definitely looks, because it's a rag doll, like he's folded in half by it. So
yes,
it looks like his back is definitely broken.
So he's fucking dead, and he drops off the end of the windmill. The windmill's on fire, and it burns down, and it's done.
Well, there's a quick shot inside the windmill with massive fire burning, where a giant beam falls on Frankenstein, seeming to trap him in there. So they seem to be pretty deliberate that no, he didn't get out.
He's dead.
He's dead. Yes, and of course they recover the body of Victor Frankenstein, and he's in bad shape. They're not sure whether he'll live, so they take him back to the town, the hospital, to be treated and all that sort of stuff. And ultimately, his monster ends up possibly killing him, and then the town kills him.
Yep.
And then there's a final scene, Hugh. What happens in the final scene?
This is one of my favorite fucking parts. It's so bad. Okay, so Dr. Frankenstein is lying in bed. He's recovering from his injuries. It's made pretty clear he's recovering. His wife is in there with him, and all the servants of the house come down. And there was a scene earlier where the Baron Frankenstein had pulled out a bottle of old wine that his grandfather had laid down, and it's kind of a funny little beat. They talk about how good it is, and then he says, to give the servants some champagne. This is too good to be wasted on them, right? Yeah. And so at the end of the movie, all the servants come down with the bottle of old wine and a cup. And they go, well, he comes out of the sick bed and he goes, what's all this then? And they kind of look at him and go, well, we thought that your son would enjoy some of his grandfather's wine. And he goes, oh, yes, wow, what, yes. And he pours a little cup of it, goes in, and then immediately turns back around and just goes, he doesn't need any of this. Here's to a son of the House of Frankenstein. And then it just ends. Movie over. Done. The end. Credits roll.
It's such a bad ending. And that scene is almost totally unnecessary, I would say.
So I don't understand what they were getting at. What was What was this supposed to? The ending of your movie is really, especially in these kinds of things, it's where you drive the theme home, right? Like at
Yes.
the end of Bride of Frankenstein, which we're not going to go into full detail about it, but at the end of Bride of Frankenstein, the bride has reacted poorly to Frankenstein, and he has realized that she hates him, and there is, no real there's no real hope for him to keep going. So he allows Dr. Frankenstein and his wife to leave, and he says, you go, live, we stay, belong dead. And then he blows the thing up on top of himself and sort of like self-sacrifices to remove all of that from from that's the ending of Bride of Frankenstein. That punches the theme home real solidly. With this scene, I have no idea what the hell he was getting at. Like,
I
if
no idea why it was included in the movie at
it's like
all.
it's like a random flourish that go. It's like bump.
I'm fine with a little a little like a denouement, however you say it, a little scene, a little bit of falling action where we see what happens next. It's just nothing of value was said or established here. Like we're not driving the theme home. We're not learning anything new at all. We just get another scene of the bear going, "Oh, what's
What?
it's like, oh, here's to another son of Frankenstein." I'm like, well, that wasn't a theme. That's just the title of a movie that's going to happen in like 10 years. I'm not sure why. Because it could have just ended immediately after the windmill is on fire and collapses. Could have ended there. Boom, the end.
That's where all the rest of them fucking end. Is like
Yes.
right there. So
That's where the Wolfman ends. That's where a lot of movies from the 70s and 80s ended, funnily enough.
Yeah, The
Like
Fly.
Jaws, The Fly, American Werewolf in London, all sort of end like, and the monster's dead, the end. Like no falling action, no what happened to these characters later. It's over now. Which, it can work. Jaws is a movie I would like a little bit of falling action on. It
Yeah.
always disappoints me that we don't get to see any of the town's reaction to any of this because so much of the movie is concerned with the town's reaction. But
Yeah, but like
anyway,
The Fly,
it's
it
fine.
ends pretty well.
Yeah,
That's like
the
that's a good spot to turn it off. American Werewolf in
Werewolf,
London is a little
yep.
abrupt, but still works fine.
Yes, The Wolfman is
Yeah,
the
The
movie that
Wolfman.
did same sort of thing, and it's quite a bit like American Werewolf in London. I suppose that shouldn't be too surprising, but they don't tack on some random scene that establishes nothing and then go, okay, now it's over. Which is what Frankenstein does. It's very bizarre. Otherwise, I'd say it's a solid enough movie. Well directed, got a lot of great things going for it. The story is just not the greatest. It's okay. It's worth a watch. It's definitely an incredibly important movie in the history of film.
Yeah.
Very influential, iconic, and all that sort of fun stuff.
Breezy watch, it goes by quick.
Yes.
It one interesting thing that a change that takes place between this one and Bride of Frankenstein is that there's not a lot of music in this one. The scenes play out pretty much in silence. Bride of Frankenstein adds some score, which I think kind of helps. I always like. There's a little bit.
There's some score,
Yeah,
but
not nowhere near as much as as the rest of them do. Like the rest of them,
Yeah.
it's very very like ubiquitous. It's all over the place in the others.
I quite like the score in The Wolfman. It's
Yeah,
a tangent.
yeah.
Not as a tangent, it's a segue to the next film.
Yes.
Like one of the, I think, in terms of like shot composition and the way scenes are lit and framed and all that sort of stuff, I think Frankenstein is the strongest of this little collection here. But The Wolfman has a really great score, I would say, and it's well shot in its own right. I think it's a well directed film. But yeah, I really like the music for The Wolfman. There's a lot of
me too. Honestly,
it
I
calls
think it was pretty good.
it calls attention to itself, but not in a bad way. I think it's good. Jay Jamison says it would be interesting to see the fallout with the mayor, but it's not really necessary. Yeah, I wouldn't say the any falling action in Jaws is necessary. I think it's still a great movie. I'd certainly like to see it. I'm always like, oh, but we did so much with the townspeople, and now we don't get to find out their reaction to any of this. I would like some, but that's okay. It's fine. Yes. Now we are talking about The Wolfman, which is a classic werewolf story in almost all respects. It's got the basic arc story that you'd probably guess. There's the man who gets attacked by a werewolf and ends up becoming one, and then he dies tragically at the end. It's it's a werewolf story, but it's pretty good. I think there's a lot of things about it that I find compelling and I think are well executed. I think the werewolf makeup costuming is fun. Certainly there's been, with all the improvements in technology, I've seen way worse werewolf costumes than this. This is it's definitely a product of its time. I think they would have done more if they could, probably. It's very minimalistic in terms of how much he changes. He's covered with hair now. He's got the teeth and the claws and everything. He still looks very much like a person. Um, but it's good. I think it looks good. I've seen way worse. There's you know, with all the advancements in technology, werewolf design and costuming and makeup seems to be a hard thing to nail for a lot of people. There's been a lot of ugly werewolves in the history of cinema. I think this is probably above average for
Yeah, yeah, I would
as
say so.
dated as for as dated as it might be. I think it holds up
He
reasonably well.
his the top of his hair kind of looks like Anthony Michael Hall in The Breakfast Club. He's got a little bit of the nerd poof going.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's got a little bit of a Jufro going.
yeah.
Um,
But overall, like, I mean, the effect. So one of the things that I really liked about Wolfman versus Frankenstein is the transition from normal to werewolf gets much smoother. In this one, it's a little bit more wonky, but it still looks, for the time, looks
it's
pretty good.
it's that thing where they have the actor either it's either a series of still frames where they actually have him freeze and hold in place and they slow dissolve
Yeah,
overlay more and more of the effects on. There's like the initial, I think in this first movie all they really do is show the shot of the feet at first, and the feet then they dissolve a shot of slightly more hair on the feet and then slightly more and then the full feet with like the wider paw like toes and claws and all the hair and all that sort of stuff. At which point we tilt up to see his face. So that's how they do it. It's not bad for 1941. The effect does get better a couple of years later for Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. That's probably one of the only points of praise I'm going to give that
yeah,
movie, is that they
exactly.
slightly improved the transformation scene. None of I mean, obviously, the best of all time for me is still American Werewolf in London. I think
Yeah,
that's one of the best ever made. It's good shit.
Van Helsing's not too bad.
It's not too bad.
It's a little dated, but it looks better than a lot of modern Marvel movies. So can't fault it for that.
Yes, yes. So many werewolves. It's hard to, because some of them I haven't seen. Someone mentioned Jack Nicholson's Wolf holds up well. James Spader is basically the perfect asshole. Have you seen that movie? Because I have
No,
not. There's
no,
also
I've
a
seen the one that he was in about witches. That one.
the Witches of Eastwick.
Yes, yeah, that one.
Very different movie. Have you seen 2010's The Wolf Man
Oh, with
with
Guillermo del Toro in the role he was born to play.
not
Just
Guillermo del Toro? You
Oh,
mean
Benicio del Toro. Sorry, the
that's
other
the
del
one?
Toro. Yeah, the other
Yes.
one. I've seen part of it. I didn't like it.
It's got a stellar cast. It's him, Anthony Hopkins, Emily Blunt, and Hugo Weaving.
It's a good cast. I
It
saw
is a
one
good
scene of
cast.
him in a scientific thing transforming, screaming, "I'm going to kill you all!" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I'm done."
Well,
I
that's a
think I
shame.
would. Yeah,
That's a shame. Anyway, back to 1941's The Wolf Man. I talked about the very, very basic overview of the plot, but more specifically, the film starts with is it Joe Talbot? Is that his name?
Larry.
Larry Talbot. Joe Talbot is his dad, I think.
Yeah, Lord Tal. I don't know.
Something
He's
like that. Anyway,
something.
Larry Talbot returns to the manor he was born on in England somewhere, even though there's a lot of like either mediocre or like there's no
Non-existent.
attempt
Like,
at all non-existent English accents in this movie. It's a little all over the place, but this does take place in England somewhere. He returns to the estate after his brother's death, And so he's meeting with someone who I had no idea was supposed to be his dad because they don't quite behave like it. I thought he was just sort of the guy in charge of the estate, like
Just a
a
like a butler or a friend or something. Yeah, like
yeah.
yeah, it's a strange relationship between the two of them.
Because then later they're like, "Oh, dad." I'm like, "That's your dad?" Well, first of all, they look nothing alike, but
Yeah,
setting
well,
that I could
he says
excuse
he's been
that.
away for like 18 years before he's finally come back, which is,
Yes.
yeah,
Anyway,
wild.
but he returns after the death of his brother to the estate that is now rightfully his, I suppose, or will be once his dad dies. And he just has an American accent, so I I was I was a little confused by all this, but then I remembered that, oh, this is back in the day. They just didn't really bother with authenticity in terms of accents. I think his character is supposed to be British.
He,
Was he in America the whole
he
time?
was in America for 18 years, yeah.
Okay, well maybe that's never mind. Well, never mind. I take it back. But there's no trace of English accent. Anyway, he returns home and he
He, he surprises yeah, he's a little bit nervous at first, but he surprises his dad by building a telescope in their attic, which has been turned into an observatory, which,
yes. So we established that he has some abilities for like tinkering and making things, building things, fixing things. So he like puts
yeah,
together their telescope, and then he's looking through the telescope, and he's basically using it to just look down into the village.
and
And
then he uses it to peep on a girl who, works at an antique shop next door.
yeah, he sees her through a window and goes, "Oh my gosh, it's a pretty lady. I got to go talk to that pretty lady." And so he goes down to the antique shop, and he's like, "Hey." That was one of the things I quite liked about. First of all, the guy who plays Talbot, I don't remember his
Lon
name.
Chaney.
That's the one. He makes really funny faces in this movie that provide quite a lot of amusement for me, especially when things get crazy for him later in the story. But when he goes to talk to Pretty Lady who works at the antique store, he's like, "Oh, I'm looking for earrings, rings, and jewelry and things of that nature." And she's like, "Okay, how about these?" And she's showing him a bunch that she has in a little display right in front of him. She's looking down at it. He just stares right at her the whole time and doesn't even look down, which is kind of a funny detail.
Yeah.
She's like, "What about these?" And he says, "Oh, those won't do at all." But he never looks at them, so that's kind of fun. And then he starts hitting on her in a very odd way, I would say. He's kind of a total creep in the
Yeah.
way he goes about
It's
this.
it's really like, yeah, I was watching it with my girlfriend and she was like, ew, ew," like making
Yeah, not
he's
a,
he's not doing a great job.
no, and he's not coming across as especially charming or likable in these scenes. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, if he was a bit more charming, if he played it a bit more like, haha, I'm joking, maybe you could pull this off. But it does come across as creepy to me. He's like, oh, no, I'm talking about these specific earrings that are
This
half
yeah, half
moons.
moon gold shape. And she's just like, well, we don't have any of those there. He's like, well, sure you do. Up in your bedroom.
And she's like, "What the fuck?" And she's like, how did you know that?" And he goes, "I'm psychic. Anytime I meet a woman, I know everything about her instantly." It's like, what are you doing, man? Like
Honestly,
this.
like I didn't mind the psychic thing because I was like, "What is he gonna do here?" Like this is a strange game to be playing, right? Is to be like,
Yes.
"Oh, of course you do. I've seen them in your bedroom," and
Yes.
and she proves relatively receptive to it, right? She's like, "Tell me,
Well,
how did you know about them?" Like, I mean, like she
she's
could have.
asking follow-up questions, but then he's like, "Hey, meet me later. We'll go get your fortune read." And she's like, "No,
No, and he's
no,
just
I'm
like,
not
"Well, I'll be
doing
here
that."
at 8.
And
No.
she's like, "Nope, I'm not doing that." So at first, like I wasn't quite sure if they were going for the like she's secretly into it or not, because the way it's played in terms of their performances, he doesn't come across as especially charming, and she seems genuinely disinterested or uninterested. And so I was like, what are we doing here exactly? Is this going to be the thing where eventually she does fall in love with him? I feel like their romance, if you can call it that, is easily the worst part of the movie.
Yeah,
And that it
it's
just doesn't feel especially earned to me.
no, not really. I mean, there's that part later where they're at the gypsy thing, and she's she's off screen for about 5 minutes, and then comes back. She's like,
Yes.
"Oh well, we had a quarrel." Like,
Oh yeah, the woman, sorry, not the woman, the man that she's supposed to be engaged to. They're at the like gypsy festival, all three of them together. Werewolf Man is third wheeling, and he's like, "Oh, where's your fiance?" And she's like, "Well, we fought off screen, and now he's gone from the movie, so I can be interested in you." It's like, "Oh, great,
okay.
cool." Good writing. Anyway, so he's hitting on her. He's not especially charming about it, but he's shooting his shot. Can't fault him for that. Um, and he's like, "Oh, like okay, well, if you won't give me those rings that only know you have because I was spying on you," she's like, "Those are not for sale." And he's like, "Fine. Okay, what about canes?" Like, okay, well, we have some canes. Look at these. And he picks up one that has a silver wolf's head on it. And he's like, "Oh, that's quite a piece right there." And then they start talking about wolves and werewolves, and she launches into a thing about the sort of local legend of a werewolf. She says the poem, the rhyme that
Yes,
everyone around here seems to know. Do you remember it?
I do.
Share it with us, you.
Even a man who's true and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolfsbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
Yes.
Or a
And
man
that
of true of heart and says something like that. Either way, that's the gist of it, right?
that is the gist.
Is and there you go. And like they talk a lot in this movie. One of the things that I really like about this is that they talk a lot in this movie about how it's nobody's discounting it as like total superstition. They're like, well, yeah, of course, werewolves. Like I don't know, maybe it's probably not real. It's fantastic that a man could fully become a wolf, but they talk a lot about how it's about the dual nature of man, of all of
I
us, as he
I'm
says. And I was like,
yes.
I like
I
this.
can't wait. I can't wait to talk more about that scene. I want to save it, but it's one of my favorite parts of the movie. The movie, I should have mentioned, does open with a shot of a dictionary definition of lycan.
Lycanthropy. Like,
Yes, which at the time was a type. It's described later in the movie as a type of schizophrenia and delusion in which a man actually believes that he can turn into a wolf. So it's presented in the very beginning like a sort of a psychological disorder in which one believes that they are a wolf. And so
yes.
this movie plays with, I think, rather interestingly, in the idea that, like, okay, there's this superstition and this local legend, and everyone's sort of aware of it. And there are people in the movie sort of psychoanalyzing it, like the Jordan Peterson talking about the symbolism of, oh, what it represents. But then it just turns out to be real. I think that's really funny to
Yeah.
me.
It
We'll talk
represents the
more.
chaos.
Yes. And so he's never heard this particular rhyme. He's never heard of the legend of the werewolf, but there's this little rhyme that everyone remembers that describes it. So what does it establish? Because obviously we're going to learn that werewolves are real. What does it establish? I think thematically one of the main things it establishes is that you can become a werewolf through no fault of your own. It's not like a moral condemnation of someone. It's kind of amoral in a sense. It's just something that can happen to someone, even if you're good, even if you say your prayers. It's just a tragedy that can befall you, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things it establishes. Another thing it establishes is that when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is full, you can turn into a werewolf. So
It
unlike
doesn't
other,
mention full moon in this one, actually. That's added in the
it
next one.
says, well, no, it says
When the
it's full
autumn
and
moon is
bright.
no, that's added in the second one. It's just when the autumn moon is
Oh,
bright in this one. It doesn't have to be a full
okay.
moon in the first.
So moonlight matters, but it's not a full moon necessarily. It's when the wolfbane blooms. Wolfbane is a type of flowering plant that happens to be poisonous, which is an interesting detail. Um, that is common in certain
Hmm.
areas in Europe and Asia and all that sort of stuff. So it's a perennial plant. I don't know when it blooms exactly. They say autumn, so one assumes that it blooms in autumn, maybe only in autumn. I'm not quite sure. But that's when you can turn into a werewolf, which is an interesting choice, I would say. Wolf's Bane seems to be the stronger symbolic connection to the wolf than the moon is in this first movie. In the second
Yes.
movie, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which, as we mentioned earlier, is basically a direct continuation of the Wolfman story more than anything, until it isn't. Uh, they play much more into the full moon aspect. They mention the full moon. They show the moon quite a bit more. When moonlight hits him, that's when he transforms. None of that happens in this first movie, which I think is an interesting deviation. Another one that isn't mentioned in this rhyme that will come up later is the sign of the pentagram is associated with the wolf, the werewolf specifically. It's not the kind of classic satanic pentagram with the intersecting lines. It looks more just like a star, like a gold star you might give a child in kindergarten. Um,
Or
that's an interesting choice. I've never heard the pentagram associated with the werewolf before, but that's established in this. And there's actually a sort of plot mechanical aspect to that symbol. Eventually, the old gypsy woman will say that the sign of the pentagram will appear in the eye of on the hand. Sorry,
oh yeah,
let me say this one more time.
the werewolf will see the pentagram on the palm of his next victim, his next fated victim.
Sort of, yeah, whoever's fated to be killed next is sort of an ominous omen. And so that's an interesting detail that I've never seen in anything else. Usually the pentagram is more associated with a sort of satanic imagery than it is with the werewolf. So, but mostly everything else is the same. At certain times, a man turns into a half wolf, half human beast of sorts, and then goes around killing folks. So he's hitting on this girl. He says, "I'm gonna come by later to pick you up at 8." And she's like, "No, you're not." And then he does because he's persistent.
And they go to get their fortunes told by Bela Lugosi the gypsy.
Yes, but before they do, it's just a fun little detail. I like that she brings along her friend as like a third wheel to help cock block him a little bit. And he's grumpy about it, which is funny because he's kind of a sleazeball. Or at least he's sleaze adjacent.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, fine, we can bring your friend if you want. And so then
I suppose.
They go to the camp where all the gypsies hang out. They're playing music. They're having a good time. And they go to get their fortune read by an old gypsy man played by Bela Lugosi.
Whose name is Bella in the story.
Yes, exactly. And the first person to go get their fortune read is the friend of the antique store girl. And so while that's happening, God, I'm already forgetting his name. Larry Talbot, and the girl he's hitting on, he's like trying to, make a move on her while they wait. It's like, well, we're not just gonna sit here and wait the whole time. Let's, he tries to get it on with her. I think she tells him at this point that she's engaged to be married, right? Yes. While that's happening, I think her name is Jenny. The other girl is getting her fortune read, and Bella, the old gypsy man, sees a pentagram appear in her hand and is like, "Uh-oh, that's not good." But I don't believe we know quite yet.
Well, I think we know. No, they've told it. They've said it already. They've said it already, so you know exactly what it means.
Wait, okay, so who? I must have skipped over something then. Because when do they say the pentagram in the hand?
I think she says it. She says it when he's looking at the sign of the pentagram on the cane. She says, "Yeah, they say that the."
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Yes, that's when. Okay, so that has been established, and then we see the pentagram on her hand, and we're like, "Oh shit, the fortune teller is a werewolf." And then he's like, he gets scared and tries to run away. He says, "I can't read your fortune anymore. Get out of here." And then classic sort of monster movie, especially werewolf trope, all the animals start to go crazy when they see or are near the werewolf. The horse starts to go nuts. Later, there's a dog that'll start barking at our main character because he senses something that we don't. Classic trope. I think it works well here. And so, then a sort of chaos arises in the woods, and
there's a scream as
there's a pretty great classic horror movie type blood curdling scream from Jenny.
It's pretty great. And right as Larry Talbot is about to like swoop in and start making out with the engaged woman.
Yes.
He does. Jay Jameson. He does not play the pentagram thing off as a fortune teller thing. He sees it. He's the only one who can see it. She can't. He looks at it and goes, "You need to leave. I will come back tomorrow. I can't tell your fortune tonight." And she
Okay,
goes,
so
"Why? What did you
really,
see?" And then like he
really
goes,
quick.
"Go, go! Fine, I'm going." And she runs off. Like that's kind of the exact dialogue that happens.
Yes. So quick to respond to Jay Jameson. It is interesting that they bring fate up into the story. We can talk more about the role fate and stuff plays in the story. But when the werewolf sees it, obviously we're led to believe that he's a werewolf, and he doesn't play it off as a fortune teller thing because he's like, "Get out of here," because I know that means I must be turning into a wolf soon, and you're going to be the person I kill. So he's trying to save her in a sense,
Yeah.
the best he can, because he can't just be like, "I'm a werewolf, please stay away from me." He just says, "Go get out of here." And so, as he's about to get it on, that Larry is about to get it on with the engaged woman, they hear a blood curdling scream. So he goes running off after her. And I quite like all the way, like, I quite like the way all this stuff in the wood is shot. There's like all the fog and everything. It's very high contrast. It's very moody and surreal. It's not really going for realism. And I appreciate that. It's fun. And so, he goes and then he sees a wolf attacking her kind of behind a tree. And he goes and he fights the wolf and he gets bit and everything. It's his life or death struggle with the wolf. He hits it with his silver wolf's
His silver
head.
wolf's head cane. He bludgeons it to
Yes.
death.
Yes. And then he sort of like is wounded and he sort of tries to like get back to someone who can help him. The girl he was trying to hit on finds him injured, brings him back to camp, to town, so his wounds can be tended to. When he wakes up in the morning, he finds out that Jenny has been killed, but her and I quite like the way this movie gets into the minutia of the detectives trying to solve the case. I always appreciate that sort of thing. A lot of their dialogue feels very realistic, and you can understand their
Yeah.
thought process. And like, there's a fun detail where the detective is they have this sort of goofy comic relief assistant that he has with him, and he keeps like telling him what to take notes of, and he goes, "Oh, very good, sir." Like Woodhouse in Archer. That's what it reminded me of. Okay,
Very
so
good, sir.
oh, very good, sir, and he says that over and over and over again, and it's definitely meant to be kind of funny, and it
Yeah.
is. And of course, it made me think of Woodhouse from Archer.
I'm
And then
squeamish, sir.
the other thing that made me think of Archer is that there's an old gypsy woman, and Hugh, when I tell you, we came so close to someone literally saying it's just like the old gypsy woman said. We came so close, but didn't quite get there, and I was very disappointed. I was really hoping for
He
that
says it in
exact
the next
line.
one, though, doesn't he? The Frankenstein versus the
No,
Wolfman.
he doesn't quite
Oh no, no,
say
no! He
that
says,
exact
"Go ask the
phrase.
old gypsy woman; she'll tell you."
Yeah, it's.
It was
But of
so
course, it made
close.
me think of Archer as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So the detectives are like, okay, Jenny has been killed. Her throat has been, torn open as if by an animal, probably by a wolf. And then they find not a wolf, where Larry thinks he had killed one, but a man who had been bludgeoned to death, and his shoes removed as well. And they're like, what's that about?
Somebody's stealing shoes and killing dudes out here.
Yes, some bludgeoned by some sort of blunt object. And then meanwhile, they're talking to Larry about his version of the story, and he's like, "No, it was definitely a wolf. I saw a wolf and I killed a wolf." And they're like, "Well, we didn't find the wolf." He's like, "No, it bit me and everything." And he goes to show the wound where he had been attacked by the wolf, and it's
And
gone.
there's no wound. It's
There's
gone.
no
It's been
wound. And
healed.
he's like, "Oh, it must have healed already." And everyone else is like, that's
Sure,
that's
buddy.
never that's never how that works." But their immediate assumption is not that he killed someone necessarily, because part of his story is true, is that he fought off, they found Jenny dead, and she definitely appears to have been killed by an animal. So he's like, okay, he probably did save her from a wolf, but who is this other guy and how did he get here? They're not quite sure how that happened yet, so they don't immediately think he did it. They think, oh, well, in all the hysteria in the dark woods and, this life or death struggle, you kind of misremembered things. It's easy, it could happen to anyone. So they're assuming that he, is misremembering certain details of the story, which is interesting, I think. They're like, you need to get some rest. You need to lay down for a while. We'll take care of this case. And so there's sort of an investigation aspect of the story. Another thing that I found quite compelling about it.
Yeah. Which is nice too, because like I mean, the detective going through and trying to piece it all together. It was funny though, because like watching him consistently sort of break down a little bit about it all. I'm just like, yeah, but they don't really suspect you, dude. Like, like there's
Yeah.
animal tracks happening. Like there's one scene where he wakes up after he's transformed into a wolf and run out, and he's killed somebody, and they're following animal tracks up to the house, and they're like, he comes to talk to his dad, and his dad explains like, some animal must have killed somebody, and like it ran through here, and he's freaking out, and they're all just kind of being like, dude, what, calm down, what's wrong with you?
No one thinks you're a wolf. Relax. And then eventually he will get to the point. This is after other people turn up dead. Who's the next person to die here? I can't remember.
It's the constable, isn't it? Or is that in a different
Right, it's the
Yeah.
constable. Oh, that's a great scene. Wait, was that the
Oh
second
wait,
movie?
no,
Or
that's
is
the
that
second movie. Shit, that's
the
actually a
second
really good
movie?
scene in the second movie. Fuck,
That
no,
is
yeah.
that is one of the best things in the second movie. Who's the second
Does he
person to
kill?
die in this first one? I'm blanking now.
I don't
Kinda
remember.
blurring
Did he
together.
kill? Yeah, they
There's
go by
someone
kind
else
of
who
quick.
dies,
Yeah,
but I can't remember who it is. Um, we're asking the expert.
Wolf and then he-
Like, who's the first person he
yeah, who's
kills
the
as
first
the
person
werewolf?
he kills as a werewolf? Nobody remembers.
Hold on, chat. We're getting the answer. This is very
Oh,
important.
oh, yeah. There's a guy
The grave
digger.
digger.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. So, he's been attacked by the wolf. He's freaking out. He thinks he's gone crazy. Everyone's treating him like he's crazy, and he's like, "No, there was definitely a wolf." All that sort of stuff. And then he has his first transformation into a wolf. And like we said before, it's pretty good for 41, but they clearly improved on it a bit in the next movie, which is 43. The transformation scene, that is. So now he's a wolf, and he runs out into the night, and he comes upon a grave digger digging graves in the cemetery in the middle of the night, and he kills him. He kills him dead. He jumps him, he slashes his throat open, he kills him.
Rips
And
his
then
throat out with his teeth. It's fucking brutal, even for 1941 too. It's a fucking brutal. Like the kills in this movie are pretty fucking good. I got like,
yeah, they're good. I wouldn't like, they're not gory necessarily, but
they're
can
visceral. They feel pretty solid.
Yeah, they feel pretty violent without showing too much, which is tricky to do sometimes. So props to that. So that's the person he kills. He wakes up the next day, like his shoes aren't on or whatever. He doesn't really know what happened. There are footprints leading up to the castle or the estate. And then, like you said, they come by and they're like, we've been trying to figure out this animal that's killing people. And he's like, it's me. Oh my God, they're after me. It's like, relax, dude. No one thinks you're a wolf. I think it's somewhere in here that he tries telling them that, like, no, I think I am a werewolf. And they're like, no, you're not. That's not a real thing. Relax. You went through a horrible ordeal. I think this is when we start to get, he's talking to the sort of doctor psychiatrist guy. He's like, no, I think you just had a traumatic experience. Like maybe you just had, with all the stress and all the trauma, now you have what they call lycanthropy. And it's like, well, why is this sudden, like, I never heard of a werewolf story. I've never heard any of this. Why is it happening now? And he's like, he doesn't really have a good answer. But they're trying
mass
to think
hypnotism, maybe.
yeah, mass hypnotism. Classic sort of, they're making all these conjectures about why he might think he's a wolf, but no one thinks he actually is at this point. And then he talks to his dad, the Lord Talbot, and he's like, what do you think? Do you think it's possible? And he's like, no, I don't think werewolves are real. Like, obviously, there's this legend of the werewolf. He sort of talks through what it is and everything, but he's like, I think it's more sort of humans grappling with the dual nature of our psyche and our capacity for evil and brutality and all that sort of stuff. It's, of course, I don't believe a person could actually turn into a wolf. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's fantastical.
Yes.
But but I do believe, I think he says, I do believe that a man can become anything within the imagination of his own mind, right?
Yeah.
Which is
so this is good. We have this character who's sort of like talking about what he's sort of psychoanalyzing it and treating it like it's not like a literal thing. It's more of a a metaphor, you know.
Yeah.
And I quite like the sort of metaphor comes crashing in. Essentially, it's like no, this is just actually real, And I quite like that we have a character in the movie who treats it that way, and then of course has to come face to face with it just being a reality. That's quite fun. I like that. It's one of the more interesting aspects of the story. Somewhere in here, he goes to see the old gypsy woman. See, like, because obviously the body they found that had been bludgeoned to death was actually Bella, the gypsy fortune teller.
Oh, he hides in the crypt when they bring Bella's body in, and he watches the gypsy woman like recite some ancient prayer over her
Oh,
son's
right, right, right,
body.
right. So yes, the body of the gypsy man is being buried. He's like slinking around, trying not to get noticed, to go like visit it and see if he can learn anything from it. He sees the gypsy woman saying, like, through like the path you're on was thorny through no fault of your own. And she's talking about like fate and inevitability, and it's like, well, now you can rest. Is the sort of general gist. It's like, this is fate and this was tragic, but now you can rest. You don't have to suffer anymore. It's sort of like a little prayer she says, you could say, over the body before it's buried.
Yeah, the final
And
farewell, her farewell to him, and
yes.
she is great. The woman who's
Oh,
playing
she's
this
very
old
good.
gypsy woman is fantastic.
Yeah, she's really good. And she's serves a nice contrast to the very sort of like materialistic, scientific, rational like Lord Talbot and all those other detectives and doctors and everything who are like trying to sort of medicalize or psychoanalyze these things that turn out to be just real, essentially,
Yeah,
kind of supernatural in a sense, and she's treating them much more um
I really like the
what
scene in like
spiritually, superstitially,
yeah,
you know.
I really like the scene with her and the priest. Like he watches this happen from behind the pillar in the crypt, where the priest comes out and says like, "We are you crazy? We can't bury this man without prayer. Your people have been coming in, dancing and making merry. What kind of funeral is that?" And she has this. She's like, this is how my people have said farewell to the dead for 1,000 years. I couldn't stop them even if I wanted to, right? Which I just
Yeah.
like. I really like the way that she says that and provides like that foundational sort of like uh light, right? Like she's like the lighthouse for the character in this movie. Like
Yes.
he returns to her for help, and she's willing to she's willing to help him as much as possible, right? But like as
Well,
we
and
see,
let's talk about that help. So Larry goes to visit her and it's like, I think I'm a werewolf. You got to help me. And she's like, and she basically explains, the rules to him, and that like, yes, you're a werewolf. Here's like a locket, a charm to wear with the pentagram on it that will protect you. Now go and get away from here. And then what does fucking stupid Larry do? He goes to talk to the woman he's trying to get with this whole movie, and he's like, "I don't need this. You should have it to protect you." It's like, no, just the gypsy woman gave it to you. There's reason to believe it might prevent you from turning into a werewolf.
why
Like,
are you doing that?
why is she giving it to you
She's
otherwise to
not that
protect
into
you?
you, Larry.
And he's like, here, you have it. You need it more than I do. It's like, no, no. That was really dumb. But it's like, why are you doing that? Larry, you moron. You've ruined everything. And then of course things go wrong after that, as you can imagine. Let's see how because eventually he's going to see the pentagram in her hand. That is the girl he's
That's
trying
when
to get with.
he shows up at like after another attack, right? He shows up after another attack to her place to say like I'm running away. I got to leave. And she's like, "Well, I'll come with you," cuz that's after her and her
Yeah.
fiance have had a scrap at the fucking county fair.
Yeah. Jay Jameson makes a good point. He says, why didn't she give her son the charm? So yeah, because if it did prevent him from turning into a wolf, then likely her son would have one. and he
Yeah.
would have prevented it. So okay, so I think that's a fair point. I don't think it would. I don't think we are meant to assume it would protect him from turning into a wolf. But what does
Well,
it
then what is it?
do?
What's it supposed to do then? Like,
That's a good question. I don't know what it's supposed to do. But either way, she gives it to him. You assume that there's some sort of logic to it, and he
yeah,
immediately gives it away to her. For no clear reason other than he's really trying to get in her pants.
yeah, yeah. He really wants to. He's really shooting his shot here. He's like, no, no, no. I put all my eggs in this basket.
Yes. And so they go to the gypsy sort of carnival area. And then
There's
when
a
he
little
talks.
shooting game that he plays against her fiance, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
he's doing pretty good. And then a little wolf pops up, and the guy goes, "Hey, hey, you better get him before he bites you." And he stops because he
Yeah,
can't
he's
bring
shooting all
himself
the
to shoot the
little
wolf.
ducks and all the other little figures down. He stops at the wolf. He can't bring himself to shoot the wolf, which is a funny detail.
Kevo in the chat brings up a good point. Maybe Bella thought the charm looked kind of gay.
Yeah,
He's
maybe.
like, I don't want to. I don't
maybe.
want to be looking like no, looking like no fruit.
I don't want to be a pirate. Yeah. So he's now has this weird affinity for wolves, which is great. So anyway, he goes to see the gypsy woman. She says, "Hey, take this charm and everything, and go." And then people start panicking in the little gypsy village, and they're like, what are we doing here? What's going on? And it's like, oh, there's a rumor spreading quickly amongst the gypsies that there's a werewolf in camp. So they're hightailing it out of there. Like, uh-oh. Is this when he's gonna transform again? That would
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly what happens here. Take it away, Hugh.
I don't remember exactly what happens. I remember that eventually he comes to the antique shop and he's like, I'm gonna bail. See ya. And she goes, no, 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 let me come with you. I fought with my fiance. It's over, basically. I'm just gonna go with you instead. You gave me a necklace.
Yes.
And he's
Yes.
like, no, that's awful. And then like he looks at her hand and sees the pentagram and goes, ah, fuck this, and leaves. And she's all upset.
Right.
Her dad
Yeah,
comes down and is like,
yes.
what the hell are you doing? What is going on? Her dad is like, got to be the most patient man on earth at this
Yes.
and he runs off, transforms. She runs off into the woods to look for him, to try to help him for some stupid reason.
Well, yeah. She's just like, no, like you need me to help you. It's like, no, you need to stay away from him. And but she goes looking for him. He transforms. Then she runs into the gypsy woman, right?
Yeah. There's a mob of villagers out there all hunting him. Oh, he gets caught in the wolf trap, right? He gets caught in the bear trap at one point.
Yeah, so while this is happening, the investigators are looking for whatever animal could have done this, as well as maybe who bludgeoned that guy to death. And so eventually they're like, well, we should be hunting this wolf, so let's set up some traps around. And after he transforms again, Larry Talbot, Wolfman, he steps in one of the traps, and then the way he falls on the ground is very funny. He's like rolling and writhing around on the ground. It's great. It's very slapsticky. And so there's a chance like, oh, he might get caught.
Yep, he might get caught, and he's in the bear trap. He's writhing around. The gypsy woman comes to him and says like a little spell, recites a little spell that frees him from the wolf form, and he gets out of the bear trap, and then he starts walking away. And some of the people who are looking for him see him, and they're like, "Hey, you, come back here."
What are you doing out here, Larry? And he's like, same thing you're doing, hunting the wolf. And then he just walks away.
He walks in, he's wearing no shoes. He's like clearly frazzled.
He's limping.
They're like, oh, it was Mr. Larry. He's out here. He's out here same as us.
His leg getting in a wolf trap. It was an interesting choice to have the old gypsy woman stumble upon him in the wolf form and then say the little prayer, and that like brings him back to human. That was a weird thing to establish so late in the movie, but there it is. And so now he's not a wolf again. He's wandering away in the woods, and
everybody's getting a little
one of the
sus.
investigators kind of shows up and he's like, all right, you guys keep looking for the wolf, I'll go follow him.
Yeah.
And then he turns back into the wolf again, right?
Yeah, yeah, because it's eventually gonna get to because that all happens before the Gypsy Carnival, because she's still in town, you know. So they go to the
Yeah.
carnival, and then they all pack up to leave, and then yeah, and then he transforms again. And yeah, basically we get to the end scene of the movie where they're like chasing him through the woods, and a couple of people talk about how they shot him, right? And they could have sworn they hit him dead on. And right about then is I think where they establish. Oh no, they talk about like the reason.
They established it earlier, but they reestablished that like you need a silver bullet.
Yeah,
You need a weapon of silver to kill him because he kills the initial old gypsy man werewolf by hitting it over and over again with the silver end of his cane. So
yeah.
it takes silver to kill it. And so they're chasing him through the woods.
He gives his
and
dad the
everything.
silver cane, the silver topped cane too, and
Yes. And
yeah.
eventually he attacks his dad.
Well, he attacks the girl first, and then his dad comes in to
Right.
save
Yes.
her, and he attacks his dad, and then his dad beats him to death, and then
With
they
the
all
cane.
with the cane, and then they all show up, and he's dead on the ground, and they go, "Oh man, you must."
And he's turned back.
Yeah, he's turned back, and they go, "Oh man, uh, poor Larry, he must have come across the girl being attacked by a wolf and jumped in to save her." And that's it.
Yes, it's kind of okay. So a couple things that are really interesting about this end for me. I like that it's his dad who
Yeah.
like reality comes crashing in on him essentially, and he has a very sort of tragic ending where he loses yet another son to a werewolf
Yeah.
of all things, and he has to be the one to kill him. That's pretty brutal in a horror tragic sort of way, and I really like the detail that RX like we're gonna sort of not brush this under the rug because there's no real wrongdoing that they're brushing under the rug, but like they sort of talk about the simpler, um, more nobler version, less tragic version of events they're gonna go with in terms of the explanation here. I think that's an interesting choice as well. Try and like soften it for him, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
It's like you did
it
there,
is
like
interesting.
she was being attacked by a wolf, and you stopped it. You're a hero. And meanwhile, he's dealing with the fact that he just had to kill his own son, essentially,
Yeah.
who would become a werewolf, which he didn't like. He didn't believe him when he was saying it earlier. All that sort of stuff weighing on him, all in that final moment. It's really interesting, and it's pretty tragic, pretty effective, some good horror shit, and then the movie just ends, which I think is a much stronger ending than Frankenstein.
Yeah, I
Or
think so.
certain.
It gives you a little bit of time with the weight of it all, gives you what the story they're going with is. It lets it hit you that this is, you know, how wrong they've got it, right? And then it just ends. And you know what? It works.
It works. So J.J. Jameson asks, she has a spell to turn him back. She just keeps showing up too late. Well, she has a spell that can turn him back like briefly.
Yeah.
It's definitely not permanent. It's just like a little thing she can do, and obviously she can't be everywhere at once. I wouldn't say it's especially contrived or anything. It's just a little weird to establish that's possible
Yeah.
so late in the movie.
And
for me.
you know, another thing is that, you know, the girl from the antique shop, when she goes out looking for Larry, she runs into the old gypsy woman and she says, "Where is he? I want to help him." And she goes, "Oh, stay with me and we'll find him together." You know,
Yeah.
like, and she just goes, "No," and leaves.
But basically, everyone should have just listened to the old
She
gypsy
basically
woman.
she's like, "When you come with me, we need to get out of here," right? And like
Yeah.
she realizes that, you know, if she's with her, she like she could as easily have been like, you know, look, he's a wolf, and if he comes by, I can probably, you know, like turn him back a little bit, right? But like, you need to
Yes.
come with me because it's dangerous out there. Not to mention they're out in the dark woods with a bunch of people looking for anything that's moving with guns. Right, like you're in a rough spot, lady.
Yeah.
Like, you should not be running out there. You need an orange vest.
She has a son that she knows is a werewolf. Why doesn't he go to her and she can keep him safe until secured? Well, it happens pretty suddenly. The transformation happens like very quickly, and kind of like it's not specific about when it's going to happen, and then it just happens. So it's very hard to just predict.
Yeah,
He doesn't.
There's no full
It's not
moon
something
mechanic.
Yeah, there's
in
no
this
like.
one.
There's no regular schedule of the moons waxing and waning to rely on. It's like, oh, a certain time you could just turn into a wolf, and then he starts to, and it all happens very quickly. He's doing his normal fortune teller thing. He's not expecting to turn into a wolf. He sees the omen. He's like, "Oh fuck, shit!" He panics and then basically turns into a wolf almost immediately because then he starts to
Yeah,
because like immediately the animals start freaking out and like 30 seconds later in story time, like there's a loud scream. So it's very much something that is not easy to predict in this story.
I mean, like you know that it happens when the wolfsbane is
Hmm.
blooming, right? Like they know that in this general time of year is when
Yes.
this can happen. You know, that's what the song says.
Yeah.
But it
It's
doesn't.
nothing so reliable or
Yeah,
predictable that it becomes a problem that he didn't immediately run and get the help of. If she could even necessarily do anything, it's not entirely clear. Um, to like fully prevent it for a long period of time or anything like that. It happens very suddenly, so that doesn't strike me as a problem for the story at all.
yeah. It becomes a little bit wonkier if you're relying on the idea that, like, the full moon is what drives it.
Yes.
Um,
Because usually in those stories, when people sort of start to realize, or they accept and understand that they are werewolves and how it works, is that they like try to lock themselves up. That happens a lot in these sort of
yeah,
stories to
Oz
prevent them.
and Buffy.
Yeah, this one is a lot more vague. It's a lot more of like oh, you can turn into one when this happens generally. It's like a certain time of year it could happen to you. It's much more vague, non-specific, and as we mentioned, the transition happens very abruptly. So there's no time to be like, oh shit, let me go run and get my, EpiPen.
Yeah.
um, Mr. Redhead says this movie would have been so much better if the devil was behind it, controlling everyone's actions. The director of Longlegs. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
direct quote.
yeah, pretty much.
He says that of every movie he watches. I'm pretty sure of it. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
It's not a problem for the story. Like, obviously, she can help things a bit. And if she were right there in the room, she might have been able to say something, and then she just doesn't happen to be like that. It's not
Yeah,
a
I
problem
don't
for the
think that's
story.
yeah, that doesn't bother me so much. Although it, like, I mean, the one thing that bothers me about that situation is like what the amulet is a little bit of a problem, because it's like, well, what does it really do?
Yeah, that one's a weird thread that goes nowhere. It's like she gives this charm that might help, but
I
like
mean, like,
how?
technically she didn't die. That is correct. Nikki's in the corner, like, chiming in on that one. Yeah, like, technically she didn't die, even though he saw the pentagram on her thing.
Yeah,
So I guess maybe in some roundabout, like, because you never know if that's because of the charm or just because his dad happened to be in the right place at the right time. But she does give it to him as like a way of, like, he says, "Please help me," and she gives it to him,
yeah,
and that's the that's her solution, right? And then that it doesn't really go anywhere. We don't know exactly what it was going to achieve because if it did solve the problem, you would assume, right, that it would have been on her son at the time. Like, he
yeah,
probably would have been wearing it.
yeah. If it actually just magically stopped him from turning into a wolf ever,
Yeah,
she would have said that when she gave it to him. It seems yeah, it's not clear what the mechanics of that are and whether it does anything. It's kind of unnecessary if you're not going to do anything with it. I would say it doesn't break anything, but it does make you wonder, like, why is that there?
yeah,
What was that included for? But otherwise, it's a pretty straightforward and relatively well executed little werewolf story. I like the sort of tragic ending. The very much mirrors the initial attack.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I like that. I like it mirrors the original attack, and then his dad uses the same cane to you know not to defeat him, in the same way.
yeah,
But yeah, so that's the end of the movie, and it's pretty strong. Stronger than the original Frankenstein. Maybe not entirely than Bride of Frankenstein. I like probably a little bit stronger than Bride of Frankenstein, actually, but like I like Bride of Frankenstein a lot. for that, for the purpose of the fact that, like, it establishes more character development for the monster, and it gives us a much stronger ending. But yeah, I really enjoyed the Wolfman. Thought it was pretty thought it was pretty good. Pretty solid movie. The Werewolf,
Yes.
directed by J.J. Abrams. Where did she get the charm from? That's a story for another time. That's season 2. That's some season
Yeah.
2 material.
Yes, and so I suppose that brings us to Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, the crossover event of the century. Someone asked earlier if it was the first of its kind. I don't think so. I don't think it was the very first, but it was definitely one of the earliest. I think there's even an earlier one in this franchise. Let me just look it up. Universal Monsters franchise, film series, I suppose you could call it. I think there's a team up or a crossover event before it. I can't remember exactly.
I think this was the first.
Okay, no,
From
it was
what
the
I was
first.
looking at, yeah, this was the first big one, because after this they started making a bunch called like House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, and all of those where all the other ones come into play. And originally they were supposed to involve like the Mummy and the Invisible Man and everything as well,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But they decided, not to do that.
Let's see. I'm gonna look at. I just want to see if there was ever a crossover movie sort of thing before this.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first in this group of movies, with this group of
Yes,
characters for
it
sure.
was definitely ahead of its time. I would say the idea of a shared universe between a whole bunch of disparate like monster creatures, horror stories. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Yes. So Hugh, why don't you give us the short version of everything that happens to, and I mean short,
In the
very broad.
Frankenstein universe,
Yeah, because okay,
leading up to
as we
this.
mentioned earlier, the Wolfman just sort of okay. The Frankenstein meets the Wolfman basically starts with the Wolfman being uh, people go to his tomb to try and steal from him the gold watch and all that sort of stuff he was supposedly buried with, and they sort of reawaken him because he never fully died. He just kind of sort of partially died. Was
Yeah,
in something of a
the full moon
something of a
revives him or something like that. Is like,
something of a supernatural coma he was in. He was never actually fully dead. That's the excuse we give for why he's still alive in Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. But there's been like 3 or 4 movies of Frankenstein's adventures after he supposedly died in the first movie. What is the short version of everything he's been up to?
okay, so he asked Dr. Frankenstein to make him a wife, and the wife didn't turn out. Yeah, like he decided, actually, that's a huge pain in my ass, and he killed himself instead. Um, but turns out he didn't actually die. In Son of Frankenstein, Frankenstein's son comes back to town, and the townspeople have hung a guy named Igor, who is played by Bela Lugosi, who, for some reason, just kind of like can't die. He has been basically just like coming back. Like he gets hung, his neck gets broken, but he doesn't die. He gets shot a couple times, he doesn't die. And he turns out to have made friends with Frankenstein's monster, who actually survived the end of Bride of Frankenstein. And he was wandering out in the woods, and he got struck by lightning, and he's been in a coma. And Igor wants the son of Frankenstein to wake Frankenstein's monster back up. Um, and that ends up happening, and it goes pretty poorly, as you might imagine. And eventually Frankenstein's monster is kicked into a sulfur pit underneath the castle.
Sorry, which movie is he kicked into a sulfur pit? That Son or Ghost?
That is Son of Frankenstein. He's kicked into a sulfur pit beneath the castle of Frankenstein. And that's where it ends. And that's the final one. Boris Karloff did not want to be part of these movies anymore, because he did not like what happened to the character in Son of Frankenstein. He becomes, if you can imagine it, even more of just a random killing machine in the sequel.
In the first one, even,
Yeah,
yeah.
even then in the first one, in Son of Frankenstein, he becomes basically just more of a random killing machine. And so he left the franchise after the monster was kicked into a sulfur pit. And so this movie is followed up by Ghost of Frankenstein, in which the other son of Frankenstein is appealed to by Igor, because Igor, who gets shot in this movie again, he's still not dead, and he's been hanging out at the castle playing a weird like horn, like playing a gypsy horn, trying to call the monster out of the sulfur pits. Um, the villagers come and decide to dynamite the castle, and Igor rescues the monster from the sulfur pits that get damaged by the dynamiting, and they leave, and they go to wherever the other son of Frankenstein is, and he's a very successful doctor who's finally perfected brain transplants in human beings. And so they go to ask that you fix the monster for some reason. And he goes, well, I guess I could shut him down. I could turn him off. I have to, take him apart piece by piece. And then for one scene, the force ghost of the original Dr. Frankenstein begs his son not to destroy the monster, but instead to give him a new brain.
Like he finally gets a good brain.
No. He
Oh,
is he
damn.
begs the second son of his second son to give him a good brain, and he says, "Okay, fine, I'll do it." And he plans on giving, cuz the monster has killed one of his assistants, right? And he plans on
Sure.
giving his assistant's brain to the monster. Igor has other plans. He wants Frankenstein. He wants his brain put in Frankenstein's monster's body. And Frankenstein's monster, who in this movie is played by Lon Chaney, same guy who plays the Wolfman, he wants a little girl brain instead. So there's this
But
yeah, he wants a little girl's brain, and Igor wants to put his brain in the monster, and then the main doctor, the new Dr. Frankenstein, wants to put his pupil's brain in the monster. So there's this like clash of of
there's
goals
like
here.
a brain triangle of some
Yes.
sort.
And Igor ends up convincing the other friend of he ends up convincing the other friend of the doctor, or the other doctor working under the new Frankenstein, to transplant his brain into the monster instead, because that way he'll achieve glory. The other doctor will, and he can finally get out from the shadow of Frankenstein. And
That's the
Igor,
next movie, Shadow of Frankenstein.
no, the next movie is Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
I know it's a joke.
So he gets Igor's brain put in him, but because Igor wasn't of the same blood type as the monster, Igor goes blind immediately, and then the
Oh,
whole place
cool.
burns down, and a roof beam collapses on Igor monster Frankenstein, and the movie ends. And that's where it
Wait.
picks up. Yeah, that's yep.
So when does the giant like underground glacier come into play?
That comes into play in Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
Oh, with no setup.
With
Okay,
no
cool.
setup at all, and it's totally they also
Okay.
sort of like retcon the idea. They're like, because they say that the original Dr. Frankenstein died when he created the monster. Like, they basically like retcon the whole thing, so like it's very unclear how much of that movie and Son of Frankenstein even took place by the time we get here.
Yes. Okay. So I think there's a couple things that need to be said to sort of summarize that. What is the continuity like between all of these movies? Fucking bonkers, non-existent. They're just making it up as they go. If this came out in the 80s, you would say it's Coke fueled. I want to talk briefly about what the writers were doing in this time period at Universal, because it seemed like they were just doing whatever the fuck they wanted with no real thought. No one was doing second drafts I think
No.
for a whole decade
It
here at
it has
Universal.
big vibes of like a child kind of telling you a story, and like yeah, like oh, and then he
Yeah.
fell into quicksand,
And
but
then he fell into quicksand, and then there was a glacier underground, and he wanted a good brain, but the other guy had he wanted a girl's brain, and Igor, he wanted his brain, and then they burned down.
yeah, exactly. It
Like,
feels very much like that. And then but it like with weird splashes of like cuz like the whole thing that completely screws Igor's evil plan over, right? Is the blood type was wrong. So they went for like a fucking War of the Worlds like oh, it was the microbes that saved the
yeah,
day kind of thing. You know, like and it's like, well, you know, my assistant's brain was the same blood type as the monster. The monster having a blood type is fucking insane. Let's like that's
yeah.
wild to me, but sure, fine. So yeah, like his brain stopped, like the optic nerves start shutting down because of the lack of the same blood type. Uh, and yeah, so that's how the plan is foiled.
Very cool. It reminds me a little bit of the Fast and the Furious franchise. There's some classic Onion video where it's like we get to sit down with the maker of the newest Fast and the Furious movie, the writer, and it's just like a little kid talking about like, and then the cars crash into each other and they blow up. There's a big explosion. Like
Yeah,
that's sort of like level of writing. They were just kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck. Apparently, first drafts only as a general rule. Maybe they're even writing them as they go. Maybe there's even that parallel with the current era of the MCU. Like, what's his name making Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, not knowing what he was going to do with the whole third act of the movie
yeah,
while
they
they're filming the movie.
wrote it in 2 weeks, and he's just sort. That's just a case of me not
Me not
knowing what to
knowing.
do with the script. So yeah,
Yeah, this
it's kind
does
of wild.
like all the same problems. There's almost, you know what this makes me think of in terms of all the parallels with modern cinematic universes is just like there's nothing new under the sun. You know, like we've done this before.
We've been here.
We've been here. And like, okay, so Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It's a pretty bad movie. I wouldn't say it's entirely like worthless. We'll talk about some of the things that are worthwhile about it because they're all in the beginning. So
Very front loaded, yeah.
very
As a
front
sequel to
loaded.
the Wolfman, that first part actually works okay.
Yeah, it's okay. So what happens? He's in his tomb in the burial sort of tomb for the Talbots, and two criminals break in because they hear rumors that the bodies here are buried with gold and jewelry and all sorts of fun stuff. And there's even a great line where the one guy's sort of justifying this grave robbing, where it's like, oh, it's not right to be buried with all that money. It could go to help people. And I quite like that it's like, yeah, like these guys aren't going to help people with their money either. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's a fun little detail. So, anyway, they break into the tomb, they open up the tomb, and what do you know? Larry Talbot hasn't been decomposing like they expect him to. I think we'll eventually learn that it's been 4 years.
Yes.
Yes, 4 years later, his body has not really decomposed all that much, and they're like, "Huh, that's weird." Anyway, let's get this jewelry and get out of here. What they notice is the body is entirely covered with wolfsbane, which is an interesting choice. There seems to be something of an indication, though it's not made explicit, that burying him with the wolfsbane like
Lets him
keeps
rest, maybe? Yeah, like keeps it.
lets him rest or keeps him from returning because, well, clearly, even though it was very obvious thematically and literally that he was dead in the last movie, he's back. And so their justification is, well, he's not really dead. And so you could argue maybe the wolfsbane is like keeping him preserved in this supernatural death-like coma, keeping him from rising again, perhaps, the way they do stuff with vampires to like keep them dead, essentially, in a lot of old superstitions.
Yeah.
So maybe it's something to that effect. Anyway, and so they're trying to take the jewelry off of him, and they're like, wait, I thought dead bodies were supposed to be stiff because like they can just move his arms around with ease. They're trying to take the jewelry off, and then the hand comes to life when the light from the moon enters the tomb and lands on Larry Talbot's face, and then his hand comes up and he grabs the criminal by the arm and he's holding him there with like supernatural strength and all that stuff. And the other guy's like, "Holy fuck, I'm getting out of here!" And so he like scrambles to leave the tomb and leaves his friend behind, presumably to be killed. It's a pretty good opening, honestly.
Yeah.
If you're going to resurrect a character who definitely died in the last movie, there are worse ways of doing it, I would say. And it's a pretty effective scene, all things considered. Next thing we learn, Larry Talbot wakes up essentially in a hospital in Cardiff, which is quite far away from where he was before in England. And he doesn't know how he got there or how long it's been or anything of that sort. He has no
Last thing
memory
he
of
seems
those
to remember
criminals.
is basically getting
The end of
transforming. Yeah,
the
the end of the
Wolfman.
Wolfman.
Yeah. And so they're like, "Oh, like you must have had a terrible fall. You don't remember anything." It's like, so they're taking care of him, and he's like, "No, you don't understand. I'm a werewolf." And they're like, "Uh-huh, sure you are, dude." Like whatever you say.
Yep.
Like this guy's crazy. Like something's clearly gone wrong with him. He's saying he's a werewolf. He doesn't really remember anything. He says his name is Larry Talbot, but then we looked into where he's supposedly from, and they're saying that Larry Talbot is dead. So clearly this guy
is
either an imposter or he's crazy. We don't really know what exactly, but they got to treat him. They got to figure out what's going on with him. And eventually, another full moon. This time, like I said, we are establishing that the full moon is what makes them transform. The full moon happens, he transforms, and he breaks out of the hospital he's in the night. Then we see a quite effective scene, I would say, of a police constable sort of roaming around, doing his rounds, and then he sees the Wolfman kind of hopping around and moving around like an animal sort of thing. And he's like, "What the fuck is that?" And so he goes over there and he like rounds the corner where he's expecting to see him. And he's like, I guess he's gone. And then, oh my God, he gets jumped from behind by the Wolfman and killed. It's a pretty effective little scene.
It's pretty good. Yeah, I actually really liked it. I thought it was, I was like, damn. Because he goes for the jugular too. He like,
yeah.
They don't shy away. Like they don't show like splurts of blood or anything like that. But they don't shy away from being kind of brutal. Even for 1940s standards.
Like I said, it's impactful without being gory, and I think that's that's pretty impressive, especially for the time, what you can and can't show. I quite like that the policeman sees him, and like so he's not like totally oblivious to the Wolfman about to kill him. He sees him, and he's like, "What the fuck was that?" And he goes over and he looks, and he's like, he must have gotten away. And then, oh my God, he sneaks up from him behind from a screen direction. Like he left screen left in the last shot, and then he comes screen right when he goes to kill him. So it's kind of like a pretty effective surprise. I quite liked that.
Yeah,
that was good. And so he kills him. And so now we're doing the same sort of thing. It's the Wolfman 2. There's a werewolf out killing people. So he wakes up in the hospital and he's like, "Oh my God, I must have escaped. I don't have my shoes and whatever sort of crap." And he's like, "Oh no, you have to understand. I'm a werewolf. You have to kill me." And they're like, "We're not going to kill you." Like
no.
He spends a decent amount of this movie just wanting to die, which is an interesting choice.
That is kind of his whole purpose for seeking out Frankenstein, is that he thinks Dr. Frankenstein can kill him finally.
Yeah. Yeah, and that gets weird. So eventually he is like, "Well, I need to get out of here. And I need to." He's like roaming around, and he wants to go find the old gypsy woman, right? That's the sort of what he's after. And so he goes all the way back to where he's from to find the old gypsy woman, right?
Yeah.
Or am I misremembering?
Yeah, basically. He escapes the hospital and like on purpose this time.
Yes.
He tears out of his straitjacket because they put him in a straitjacket after he has that episode where he's ranting about needing to die and being a werewolf. And he escapes the straitjacket by transforming and ripping it off with his teeth. They're like, "Whoa, okay, we got a loony on the loose." And so then, they run out of there. He runs out of there. He goes to find the old gypsy woman, and she's like stunned by the fact that he's back. Right?
Yes, that he's still alive. Like I thought you were dead, because she's standing for the audience, and he's like, "Please," because the logic is, he wants to die so he can't harm anyone ever again, and clearly killing him doesn't really work because he can't die, is sort of how he thinks about it. He can't die normally. He just kind of goes into whatever sort of coma-like thing, and he doesn't want to cause anyone any harm ever again. And so the old gypsy woman is like, I know someone who might be able to help us. Come with me. And so, and keep in mind, at this point, we're about a third of the way into the movie.
Yeah.
Like, it's been this long, and I'm glossing over some pretty boring stuff here, where nothing's really happening, and we're wasting time. And I'm like, when does Frankenstein show up? And eventually, when he meets the old gypsy woman, she's like, I know who can help us. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to go meet Dr. Frankenstein. Hell yeah. Finally, it's about a third of the way into the movie. They go all the way to whatever town Dr. Frankenstein used to live in, presumably in Germany or somewhere. You know, they have a long, long, long carriage ride or whatever it is. Or maybe it's London. Do you remember where where 31 Frankenstein takes place?
The Okay, so in Ghost of Frankenstein, it has taken place in the village of Frankenstein, which is
cool.
in
Very
the
fun
in the
additions to the
book.
lore. Yeah.
In the book, he lives in Geneva, but then he goes to school somewhere in France, and then comes back to Geneva. But then
I'm pretty sure
the monster ends up in Germany, but then eventually they go to Scotland, which is where I think he builds the bride, and then eventually they end up at the North Pole. So, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, they go
for
to
the ultimate crossover between this movie and the Tim Allen Santa Claus.
Yes.
Which is a horror movie in and of itself.
That's what Karen points out, that they're subverting the whole Terminator come with me if you want to die. That's funny.
That is pretty funny.
It's the Bavarian Alps in 31 Frankenstein. Okay, that sounds...
All right, yeah, we'll go with
close
that.
enough to me. So they have to go all the way from somewhere in England, well, originally Wales, and then somewhere in England, all the way to Germany to meet Victor Frankenstein. They get all the way there, and they're like, hello, fine townspeople. Can you tell me where Frankenstein is? And they're like, Frankenstein. We hate Frankenstein around here. He's caused us nothing but misery and trouble, and also he's dead.
Look at that, right over there. You see that burnt out husk of a castle? Yeah, we did that. That's where he died. He's dead. Go home. Yeah, get out of here, you filthy gypsies.
We don't like Frankenstein anyway, and also he's dead, so snooze you lose. And he's like, God damn, what am I gonna do? And then he's like, oh, he hears someone say something about Frankenstein's daughter, and he's like, well, we gotta have a lady in this movie, so let's go find Frankenstein's daughter. Maybe she'll have the secrets of life and death that her father discovered.
Oh, well, no, first he transforms, and like as they're riding on the cart, him and the gypsy woman, he transforms again as they're riding on the cart and runs off, and she like begs him to come back, but he doesn't listen because he's a wolf, and he runs into the castle, and the castle's full of like snow and ice and glacier stuff, and he like ends up falling asleep in the snow, and then he wakes up and he finds Frankenstein's monster in the ice, and he gets the monster out of the ice and says, well, you must know where Frankenstein hid his journals, and the monster just shows him a secret hiding spot, and then it's not there, and then he finds out about Frankenstein's daughter and goes, okay, we gotta find her then.
Okay, yeah, it's even worse. You're correct.
It is even worse. Yes, it is.
They go all the way there, and it turns out Frankenstein's dead. It's like, oh fuck! Now what do we do? Oh, contrive a reason for him to run off as a wolf. So he runs off, goes into the ruins of the Frankenstein manor, and now there's a weird frozen glacier under there.
Yeah.
Don't ask me why. It's like when they discover the caveman. Well, it's a little bit like that. It's also like when they discovered the like caveman in Scooby-Doo, like frozen in ice. So he ends up staying the night in this weird underground frozen wonderland, this winter wonderland underground. And then, oh my God, Frankenstein's monster is just randomly frozen in the ice. Even though he's like died of fire several times over, and now he's trapped in ice.
The ending scene of Ghost of Frankenstein like is really fucking brutal because his face melts. Like they take a lot of time to show his face decomposing and melting as the fire is like eating away at him before the roof beam falls on top of him and he dies. And then all of a sudden, he's been cryogenically preserved
now. Because the writer's like, fuck it, who cares? Honestly, who cares? So they're just cranking these out. And someone said, I don't know, he's trapped in ice. Wouldn't that be neat? So he has to like unfreeze him. Well, he just kind of like
he just chips him out.
He just chips him out, and that thaws him out immediately. And he's like, "Oh my god, you're Frankenstein's monster! Like you said, you must know where his secret journals are." And he's like, "Brr." He just kind of grunts. And then they find the secret place where his journals might be, and you're like, no, they're not here at all.
He pulls a bunch of stuff, like sealed envelopes and shit, out of this box without opening them, just flipping through, like pulling everything out, and he goes, "Damn, it's not here." Which I don't know how you knew that. You didn't read any of it. Also, fun fact about this movie. Bela Lugosi is now playing Frankenstein's monster because it was originally supposed to be a dual role for Lon Chaney. He was going to play Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman, but they decided that might be too much work. So they decided to get Bela Lugosi instead.
Yes.
Bela Lugosi originally had speaking lines in the movie, but every time he spoke, everybody on set laughed so hard that they decided to just cut all the speaking lines out completely.
Oh, it's pretty funny. It's pretty funny. I wish they kept it in. At least there would have been something interesting happening.
Yeah, so instead he's like, just dead silent the whole time.
The first third of the movie starts off as like an okay, not great, but okay continuation of the Wolfman story, though you're wondering the whole time, when the fuck does Frankenstein show up? And then everything that happens beyond that is like, okay, we need to go find Frankenstein. Oh, he's dead. Oh, we found his monster. Oh, his journals are gone. Oh, I guess now we got to go find his daughter. And we go meet his daughter, and she doesn't want to help. Okay, but then eventually she does. It's just so unbelievably time wasty. And what do we do?
There's a musical number in the middle of this journey.
There is a musical number. There's a musical number. We'll talk about that too. I was like so ready to turn the movie off. I'm like, what are we doing? Because when he finds Frankenstein's monster, you're like, oh yeah, finally. And then he's just a silent, mumbling like sidekick who doesn't do anything.
And he's overdoing the stiff walking and the arms out so badly. Like, Bela Lugosi is really good at the other roles that he's played in this universe. He sucks as Frankenstein's monster. He does so bad. Unbelievably bad.
And also they give him nothing to do in this whole section of the movie. We finally got Frankenstein involved, and he's just like, you help me find Frankenstein's journal. And he's like, and like, really? The movie's called Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and that's what we have. So he, like, there's some indication that he's kind of like, eventually, I don't even know when this comes up, but eventually they'll conclude that, oh, Frankenstein's monster is not at full strength now. So
yeah, well, like, because they establish that he can be like charged like a phone battery in Ghost of Frankenstein, but in Son of Frankenstein, he got struck by lightning and he went into a coma for 3 years. So
yeah. God damn it, man! This lore is insane. So they're like, "Oh, he's in a." We finally get to meet Frankenstein. Oh, but he's in a weakened state, and he's not a character at all. And this is all just in service of me finding the journals where Frankenstein wrote the secrets of life and death. So maybe, even though he had nothing to do with werewolves, maybe he discovered a way to permanently kill werewolves. What the fuck is that assumption? But that's all they have. So he goes to meet the daughter of Frankenstein, and he pretends to be interested in buying their burned down estate as an excuse to meet her.
And then immediately is like, actually, never mind. I don't want to do that. I want you to give me your father's notes on how to kill werewolves that definitely must exist.
Yes. And does she agree right away? I feel like she doesn't.
No, she doesn't. She says, "Nope, not going to do it. Screw you, buddy." And then but she's like still friendly about him 'cause, like, she's like, "Oh, the festival of the first wine, man, I really love it." And the guy is like, "Oh, why don't you stay for it? And you too, Mister Lon Chaney, why don't you stay also?" And he's like,
Yes.
"Fine." And then he,
Fine, I will. And then there's a giant festival, and they all sing a big happy song. And then eventually, Larry Talbot, Lon Chaney, Wolfman gets
loses his
so
temper.
he loses his mind. He's just like, "Stop having fun! I want to die! Stop it!" Like,
He gets pissed off because the guy is singing like and it's kind of a long musical number, and
it
like,
goes on for a long time, especially considering that the story has just all but come to a screeching halt.
yeah. And like
Yeah,
the thing that sets him off, right, is that he sees them sitting at a table and he walks up to them and thinks they're on a date, right? So he
yes.
says like something like, "May their love live eternally," and he goes, "Why would you say that to me? I don't want to live eternally. I want to die. Damn you!"
And everyone's like,
Everyone's
"Jesus,
like,
dude,
good lord,
relax."
fucking chill. It's a metaphor, okay? We didn't mean it for real. Fine, you can get divorced."
And then, and I think Frankenstein's monster shows up. Everyone freaks out,
Yeah,
right?
Frankenstein's monster comes in and everybody freaks out except Larry Talbot, who runs up and like is the only one who's not afraid of touching him, right?
Hmm.
And he grabs him and goes, "No, no, 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 no!" And then they steal they steal the cart full of all the wine that they're celebrating, and they bugger off.
Yeah,
They run away.
it's so bizarre, and you're gonna really have to help me with what happens next because I was so tuned out until the finale. I know how we eventually they're gonna discover. No, they meet another scientist who's like, "I'll help you." Who is that guy?
That's the doctor from the hospital who was trying to help
Oh,
Larry at the beginning.
oh,
He's
right.
tracked him all the way to
Fuck, you're
this
right.
village, and
You're right.
because Elsa Frankenstein, the daughter of Frankenstein, thinks that guy's kind of dreamy, she decides that she'll actually help him. So they all end up back together at the castle. They're there, and he goes, "Well, we already looked in your father's secret hiding spot. His journal's not here." And she goes, "Oh, please, I was raised here during the first two movies, if you didn't remember that I wasn't in the first two movies." And she walks into the same hidey hole where the little box of papers was, and right above the hidey hole there's a chain. And if you pull the chain, another secret hidey hole opens, and
Oh
that's where the
God.
journal was. So if he had even bothered to look, he would have seen it there the whole time. He did not need her help.
Yeah. So, and then that's when they discover in those journals that, oh, if they just use electricity, they can channel the life force energy from the Wolfman to the Frankenstein's monster. But then in classic like later Frankenstein sequel movies, everyone has a different idea of like what they want to do.
Yeah,
They're all
for convenience, because there is no real. So they get set up to do it, and the new doctor, who has come there on the pretense of helping this Wolfman, who he thinks is very ill, right in the head. He decides, basically, he's just like, "Huh, well, I've read the journal now, and I know how to do it, but I also know how to supercharge Frankenstein's monster. And wouldn't it be neat if I did that instead of doing the thing that I said I wanted to do? I'm going to do that instead." So he does.
Yes. Okay, so we need to back up to talk briefly about all the fucking insane contrivances they got here and how this started as just a continuation of the Wolfman story. And he's like, "Well, I want to die." Someone mentioned, "Why doesn't he just throw himself in a volcano?" That would be funny. I don't like, would he just be burning eternally? That actually doesn't sound like much fun because it takes silver to kill him. So maybe, I don't know. But there's other
Jump into
options.
a
But
vat of
basically,
molten silver.
it starts off all right. He goes to the gypsy woman, right? She might know how to permanently kill a werewolf since apparently this last one didn't take. He goes and she has heard of Frankenstein, knows that Frankenstein discovered the secrets to life and death. Now we need to unpack that because all he did was reanimate
A corpse.
a corpse, not solve the problem of werewolf immortality for good. like why would like one is supernatural, one is much more grounded in science in big giant air quotes. So there's no reason to assume that there'd be any overlap. But the gypsy woman is like, well, fuck it, I don't have any other ideas, and also Frankenstein's name is in the title, so we're gonna go all the way to Germany to find him. Oh, it turns out
Ah, shit, he's
he's
dead.
dead and everyone hates him, so no one wants to help him. But conveniently for the story, he turns into the Wolfman at that exact moment and happens to go run into the one place Frankenstein's monster, who didn't die, is just buried in ice underground where there would never be ice. And so we found him, and now Frankenstein's monster can help us to his secret hiding spot where he hid all this stuff. Oh, but it's not there. But maybe, but actually it is there. I just didn't look very hard. And then we're gonna go find his daughter, and his daughter's like, "I won't help you because I don't want anything to do with that nonsense. Also, you should stay for this festival because it's really fun." And he's like, "Fine, but I'm gonna be grumpy about it." And so they go and then they sing and dance. And
Okay,
then,
fine, but I'm gonna complain the whole time.
yes,
And I swear to God, if any weird Germans sing at me, I'm gonna lose my shit.
yes, exactly. And Frankenstein's monster's like, "I also want to have fun," and everyone's like, "Ew, no, get out of here." And he's like, "Fine." And then she's like, "Okay, I'll help you." It's
Well,
actually
because then the doctor tracks him down, and she
right.
realizes
Yeah,
she's like,
yeah.
oh wait,
Wait. We can't gloss over that. So the doctor has been looking for him. This is just a patient who came into his care who was kind of crazy and thought he was a werewolf, and then he disappeared. He tracks him all the way from Cardiff, Wales, to somewhere in southern Germany and finds him with ease. How?
he's just chilling at this festival.
Wait, how does he know they went here? The only reason they went here is because an old gypsy woman told him that maybe Frankenstein can help you. What? And so he tracks him all the way to southern Germany, and it's like, I'm here also, by the way.
And he's also
And
like he's a psychiatrist, right?
yes,
But they basically go, Dr. Schmachter, go for it. You could probably figure this shit out from that Frankenstein was working on. And of course
he's willing
he
to
can.
help.
He's willing to help.
Because I guess he's just on board with the fact that he's a werewolf now. Oh, here's the other thing that really bothered me. He wakes up from his werewolf form to find Frankenstein's monster in the ice. He is totally nonplussed about the existence of Frankenstein's monster. He's like, "Hey, so anyway, can you help me?" It's like, dude, this is remarkable. No, this is Frankenstein's monster.
This is
And
this
he
is a
does not
reanimated
care.
corpse that has been trapped in the ice. That you have no
Doesn't
questions.
care. He's
no,
a means
nope.
to an end. He's just like, "Hey, so can you help me or
Hey,
what?"
bud, you can
He's
help me
bored.
probably, right?
He's like bored by the existence of Frankenstein. It's very annoying to me.
I just want to die. I can't take it anymore. I just want to die.
so so this doctor shows up. He's also basically just on board with the existence of werewolves. Now it doesn't take him much convincing. He's like, "Sure, I'm a psychiatrist, but I can help you with this, like, transferring the life force energy."
I was very unclear what the plan was to be like in the first place, because like I thought it was like I was like, okay, like what is he gonna do? Is he gonna electrocute the Wolfman to death? Is that the plan? Is he gonna like?
Well, it was very unclear, but you have to sort of assume that they were going to try and drain his life force the same way they gave the life force to Frankenstein's monster. Because then it's like a thing they decide later, oh, maybe we can take that energy.
If I
and
connect
put it
the
into...
negative to the negative, he says, if I put the negative node on the negative node, then I can supercharge him. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that I've jumped a car battery before. I'm pretty sure that's not how that works. In fact, I'm pretty sure you're gonna cause a problem.
Well, the whole thing is essentially you have to assume the plan was we'll do a reverse Frankenstein's monster by draining the life energy from him, and I guess that will kill him permanently, of course, because this one scientist who created an experiment that went horribly wrong has clearly solved life and death enough that this will work on a werewolf.
Yeah.
And so, but then the plan changes to, oh, well, hey, while we're here, draining the life energy from this werewolf. Maybe we could give that to Frankenstein's monster, because wouldn't it be neat if he was at his full strength again?
I have to see him at his full power. Is basically like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Also,
Like,
like
do
that's
they
giving me an idea. Maybe I can connect the negative and the negative from my car to another one, and then my car will run forever. The battery will never die. I think, you know what, this is sounding pretty solid. I'll get back to you. I'm gonna try it.
Yeah, it's just it's just charging a car battery. And so here's the question. Initially, he's tracking him down because he thinks he's a mental patient who's insane and he needs to help him. And he's just apparently that dedicated that he goes all the way to Germany looking for him, finds him. And then do they just gloss over the fact that now I believe you're a werewolf? Or does he need to be convinced that actually, no, for
He doesn't
real,
see it. He doesn't see
he
it
doesn't
happen.
see it, right? So initially he thinks he's insane. Why would he do this? Like, when does he change his mind and go, well, okay, I
guess
now
I could kill
believe
you.
Exactly. Uh, maybe he's Canadian. So he's on board with this plan. Now, there is okay, so motivations and goals, aspirations here. Wolfman wants to die permanently for real this time, so he can't kill anyone anymore. No one's ever thought, like, well, maybe there's a supernatural cure that makes you not a werewolf anymore. Everyone's just like, okay, we'll figure out how to kill you for realsies, including the doctor who doesn't even believe him.
In werewolves. And in the meantime, the villagers are moping about the fact that they're up in Frankenstein's castle doing shit, flashing, turning the lights on and off. And one of them gets drunk and is like, you know what we should do? Guys, we should blow up the dam about it. We should destroy the reservoir that holds our drinking water about it, and if we do, it'll drown them all like rats.
A lot of people jumping to extremes in this movie, I suppose you could say. So that's the looming threat is, maybe the townspeople are going to flood them to death, drown them and everything. So the townspeople have decided they're so mad at the fact that Frankenstein's monster's back. They're going to break the dam that's presumably helping, keep the town alive. And they're going to flood the ruins of Frankenstein's castle and kill everyone involved. That's what they want. The Wolfman wants to die permanently for real. The daughter of Frankenstein is like kind of more or less on board with what the Wolfman wants. She's like, okay, I'll help you.
I'll help you kill yourself, buddy. Don't you
and
worry.
Then the scientist becomes so fascinated by the existence of Frankenstein, as someone mentioned, he has a whole new perspective once he's seen that Frankenstein is real. I still don't know if that justifies the leap to being okay with werewolves, but maybe it does. And he's like, you know what? He's almost like the person in every Alien movie who becomes fascinated with the creature.
Yeah.
He's like, actually, this Frankenstein's monster is pretty neat, actually. I'd love to see him at his full strength with like 100% charge on his battery. So actually, while we're draining his energy, I'm just going to put it into Frankenstein's monster. It'd be a shame if all that energy went to waste. So they go to do the thing, and oh my gosh, she finds out that that's what he's doing, and she's horrified by this. And now the monster is like supercharged, but the Wolfman hasn't died yet. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, the monster's supercharged. The Wolfman's not dead. The monster gets off the table and the doctor decides he's going to try to fight him, even though he just cranked his power level to over 9,000. Yes. And so he gets easily manhandled.
Yes.
The monster grabs the girl, but the Wolfman then wakes up because the full moon is right there, and so he transforms, and he attacks. He's the hero now, so he attacks Frankenstein's monster, and yes. The doctor and the girl escape. In the meantime, that drunk villager who's very, like anti-government, Timothy McVeigh over here has decided to dynamite the dam, which he does, and it floods, and that's the end of the movie. That's the end of the movie. It's over. It's done.
Pres- Presumably, though, of course, if they wanted to keep going, they'll just bring them back. They all died in that flood. The end. Except that the werewolf can't die because of a flood. So he's
Frankenstein's monster was literally in ice. They're both immortal. They're not gonna die. This is
yes,
not gonna kill them.
yeah. I misspoke. What I should say is the movie's like, and then they all got destroyed in the flood. And then you go, wait a minute, neither of them can be killed by a flood. What what is happening here? And there's not, it's like, what do you mean? The movie's over. Go home. Everyone go home. There's nothing to see here. So the whole arc of the story from the Wolfman's perspective is he wakes up after 4 years in a coma going, "Oh my god, I can't believe I'm alive and I'm a monster who kills people. I need to figure out how to die for real." A whole bunch of time wasting nonsense. Eventually, we finally do the plan where my energy is drained and given to the monster, except that suddenly doesn't kill me because the full moon. And then I'm the hero now who's going to protect the daughter of Frankenstein from Frankenstein's monster for no reason. I'm a good guy werewolf now. It's so weird, by the way, of the choice between which one is going to be more sympathetic to
To
make
go with
the
the
Wolfman
yeah.
over Frankenstein's monster. When even from the very first movie, there's some sense that the Frankenstein's monster isn't like wholly evil. He's just kind of a beast. You know, like I mean, he's even like he doesn't even try to kill that girl. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's just kind of curious. That's kind of an accident. And then in later movies, they humanize him. But the Wolfman has always just been
Well,
like
they humanize
a
him in
werewolf.
the second one, and then they immediately turned him into a killing machine in the third one, and then he is
Yeah, okay.
sort of like
It's a
just a
mixed bag.
giant retard in the fourth. So like, there's
It's a mixed bag to say the least. But the Wolfman, like they're just killing people viciously. You know what I mean? They're not like a werewolf is not quite like a wolf who just you know goes about its business in the woods. You know, like it's a killing machine. And
yeah.
Frankenstein is like a kind of a killing machine sometimes, and sometimes he's a more sympathetic, tragic figure who's just misunderstood. And so when you have a choice between which one to make the sympathetic hero at the end of the movie, they went with the Wolfman, who has like a King Kong appreciation for the beautiful blonde woman now, and goes to try and save her. And the end. So he didn't accomplish his goal. He's still alive, and he's not going to permanently die from that. So he's just going to go on killing people. Nothing about the answer to the question of will he die is no. So that's that. The scientist who was like, "Oh, my patient who clearly needs my help because he's batshit crazy and he ran away. I got to go help him." I track him down, and he's like, "I'm a werewolf," and I go, "Okay, I guess you are a werewolf because there's a Frankenstein here. Oh, this Frankenstein sure is interesting. I'm gonna supercharge him." And then he gets his comeuppance because of his hubris, I guess. The end. The blonde woman is like, "Oh, I'm just carrying on my business as the daughter of Frankenstein, trying to live a normal life in a village where everyone hates Frankenstein." And some guy comes up like, "Hey, your dad might have the secret of how to kill me. I'm a werewolf, by the way." And she's like, "I don't want anything to do with that. Um, Actually, okay, maybe I will help you." And oh my god, they're trying to bring back Frankenstein's monster. I didn't sign up for this. And then she drowns, presumably, right? Or is she saved? No, like I feel like she was
I
destroyed in
think
the flood. Is she not?
I think the presumption is that they got out. You know,
Oh,
that's
okay.
basically
Well,
it.
so what a weird day for her. Like what Frankenstein's monster. God only knows what happened to him before this because it's unclear how many of the previous movies are in the same continuity. But he ends up frozen in ice. He wakes up and some guy's like, "You got to help me," and he just grunts a bunch
Oh
and
my god.
wanders
Okay.
around.
Yeah. So this is even fucking crazy. I'm reading like because there was the note in the chat about they had to make a lot of last minute edits when they lost the rights to Dracula. This was never intended to involve Dracula. Not this one anyway. The sequel to this one involves Dracula. This one was intended as Lon Chaney to be both characters, but he initially refused to play the Wolfman. He only wanted to play the monster, and then they managed to convince him to swap the role back to the Wolfman and reprise the role as the Wolfman. Bela Lugosi was supposed to be following up his performance from the last movie in Ghost of Frankenstein, where Igor's brain is put into Frankenstein's body. So this was supposed to be Igor Frankenstein the monster, right? But
But then they just made him a nothing.
they made him a nothing because whenever he spoke, everybody who watched, so they shot it, and whenever they showed it, the screening, everybody laughed too hard at his funny Hungarian accent, and they went, "Nah, we can't have that in the movie. It's too comical." So they just cut it all out.
What a shame. What a shame. At least it'd have more camp value.
Yeah.
Because this movie's boring. This movie's really boring. It's not satisfying. Like most of the whole middle of the movie is time wasting nonsense where nothing is being accomplished. You know what I mean? There's no like
Yeah.
rising tension as
So
we're like
this is
facing all
funny.
these obstacles. It's just like, nope, that's a dead end, that's a dead end, that's a dead end, that's a dead end, that's a dead end. It's over and over again until the
Uh,
musical number.
Edward Burns, the sound man on other films by this director, stated that the director had absolutely no sense of humor and could not have recognized the comedic nature of the scenes if they bit him in the ass.
Oh, what a shame. That's pretty funny. So
They
uh,
completely discount the Larry Talbot's father, as Jay Jameson is mentioning. They really could have done something with that, as a sequel to The Wolfman, but they didn't. So
yeah, like his if yeah, you could have had some story where, okay, what if if you're trying to rewrite it, like his father being the one, okay, so he wants to die, and his father who's like, no, my son is back. I didn't kill him. I dealt with the grief of having to kill him and the tragedy of all that, but he's not really dead. There's got to be a way to cure him. And so they have like those two competing perspectives where like he's trying to find a cure and Larry Talbot just wants to die. And he's like, no, stay away from me. I'm too dangerous. All that sort of stuff. Like
yeah,
that's something. There's something there.
yeah, you could have done something with
Or
that.
to lean into Igor's brain inside of Frankenstein speaking with a funny accent and with the
Yeah, makes
personality of
sense.
Igor. That would be more fun. This movie has like by the end of it, it's like at the end of Burn After Reading, where it's like, well, what did we learn here, Palmer? Well, I guess
We
whatever.
learned not to do it again, whatever it is we
Exactly.
did. And then they went on to make 3 more movies.
Okay, how many more movies? Like what are the three that come after this?
House of Frankenstein comes next, and
Okay.
House of Frankenstein um, involves all of them. And
Okay.
let me do a quick, because we're
Including the
not
Wolfman?
including the Wolfman. Yep. So House of Frankenstein,
That's like
1944.
that's like Godzilla. What's the one where like all the monsters are in it? It's one of the
Uh,
campiest ones.
Godzilla destroy all monsters or whatever. Is
Yeah,
that the one?
I think that's the one. It's so funny that someone mentioned this earlier, and I want to highlight it because the parallels, like the son of Frankenstein, and then there's like son of Godzilla too. They have like
Yeah.
a very similar arc where they get goofier and more stupid as they go along.
Son of
And
Baconator. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
someone someone mentioned this. I don't remember where it is in chat, but thank you to the person who pointed out that originally Toho wanted to do Godzilla versus Frankenstein, where like a derivative creature, like a future son of Frankenstein's monster, fights Godzilla, and then that didn't end up happening, and they ended up doing King Kong instead, which is which is so silly.
They
Like
wanted Frankenstein at
if
first.
that's true, that's so funny because but you could see some of the similarities in terms of the arc of these things, right?
Yeah.
Where like they looked at these Universal monster movies as something of a blueprint for what to do with Godzilla, because Godzilla is kind of like the Wolfman or Frankenstein, where it's more serious and tragic and horror adjacent, and
Yeah.
then they get really goofy and campy and stupid
Very
after
quickly.
that.
Yeah. They hit
Yes.
they hit the fast lane on the goofy silliness. So yeah, for House of Frankenstein, um, this Boris Karloff comes in as a new character named Dr. Gustav Niemann, who's put in prison for trying to replicate Dr. Frankenstein's experiments. He escapes with a hunchback during an earthquake. So there's the first instance of, and there was an earthquake, and they got away. They stumble on a traveling showman and murder him and take over his horror exhibit, which includes the recovered corpse of Dracula. So he revives Dracula like Frankenstein, and then Dracula it gets chased by the police. The sun rises and kills him.
Is this all House of
This is
Frankenstein?
all in House of Frankenstein, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what are the other two movies?
House of Dracula is the next one. And then
You already said that.
no, House of Frankenstein, and then House of
Oh,
Dracula.
I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. So of course they do a House of Dracula as well.
And I think House of Dracula is the last one.
Okay, so here I have the full list of all the Universal's monsters movies. I'm going to run through them. So, starting in 1913, we have a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Then The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Phantom of the Opera in 25, Dracula 31, Frankenstein 31, The Mummy 32, The Invisible Man 33, Bride of Frankenstein 35, Werewolf of London 1935. Interesting that they did a werewolf movie before The Wolfman. Dracula's Daughter 36, Son of Frankenstein 39, The Invisible Man Returns 1940, The Mummy's Hand 1940, The Invisible Woman 1940, The Wolfman 41. Man, they're really cranking them out.
Oh yeah.
The Ghost of Frankenstein 42, Invisible Agent 42, The Mummy's Tomb 42, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman 43, Phantom of the Opera 43, Son of Dracula 43, The Invisible Man's Revenge 44, The Mummy's Ghost 44, House of Frankenstein 45, The Mummy's Curse 44. I don't know why that one was listed before. House of Dracula 45, She-Wolf of London 46.
Yes. That is also
Abbott,
that's on my Wolfman collection, my Wolfman DVD.
And, fun as these movies may be, I think your point about like Abbott and Costello being the death knell for the franchise is true, because then Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein 46, Abbott and Costello meet the Invisible Man 51, so we've really slowed down.
Oh boy.
Abbott and Costello meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde 53, Creature from the Black Lagoon 54. Okay, like maybe we're trying to start something new. Revenge of the Creature, that is of the Black Lagoon 55, Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy 55, and The Creature Who Walks Among Us, which is the third installment of The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and that's it until the remake era that starts in the late 70s. So yeah, Abbott and Costello did kind of kill off, which is pretty funny. Or I guess you could say maybe they were like, actually, no, because they were cranking them out pretty consistently. Maybe they were already seeing diminishing returns, and then they thought maybe we'll do Abbott and Costello spin-offs.
It may not surprise you to hear that this one was not well received at the time.
Yes.
It is only in recent years that, like, if you look at the Wikipedia thing, it's like, oh, in recent years, reception has shifted from being mostly negative to mostly lukewarm.
Yes. Yes. So there was that period, I think starting around 1940, where they started basically making 2 or 3 a year, and those don't seem to be very well reviewed. I think, as someone mentioned, is this the first example of franchise burnout? I'd say it probably is.
Yeah,
at least in the movie era. Maybe there was a franchise burnout thing that happened in books before this, but yes, this was the first franchise cinematic universe that had its entire life cycle and then died. I wonder when the MCU will be like, fuck it, the Abbott and Costello era.
Kevin Hart meets Iron Man.
Oh, that'd be so stupid. It could happen. It could happen. They could get so desperate. So yeah, I think they definitely burned out in that era with all the like Son of Dracula, the Ghost of the Frankenstein, Ghost of the Mummy, Daughter of the Wolfman, just fucking whatever.
She-Wolf of London, Dracula's Daughter, Abbott and Costello meet the Invisible Man. Fuck it.
The Invisible Woman. I love that there's the Mummy's hand, the Mummy's penis. No, we'll save that. That's too much.
The Mummy's asshole. No. You're thinking. You're going the wrong direction.
Yes.
The Mummy's tomb. Okay, that better. Let's go with that.
So that's the gist of the Universal Movies franchise. Of course, then there's the remake era. I'm going to go through some of these as well. 79, there was another Dracula. There was The Mummy in 1999. That has been mentioned already. The Mummy Returns in 2001. The Scorpion King, 2002,
Oh yes.
which I guess that's the same universe as The Mummy, right? Because it has
Yeah, sort of. It's kind of the same universe as the Mummy, but like the Scorpion
a
King in the
mess.
second one. The Scorpion King is kind of a villain. Like
Yes.
he's like an antagonistic force.
Wait, has Dwayne The Rock Johnson been doing this for decades?
Yes,
Okay.
sort of. Yes, taking over franchise, parasiting on franchises, and
And then
yeah,
ruining it.
ruining them like tapeworm, like a tapeworm. Although technically, to be fair, he didn't ruin that one. I think they did plenty on their own with the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
Yes.
That was enough. Yeah, Scorpion King is a prequel to the other one, but the character is very different from what I remember. Like they cast him very
Interesting.
much more as like a hero, a Herculean kind of hero.
Sure.
And then like in the next one, he's like cursed because of a deal he made with the Egyptian devil like I
Anyway,
don't know.
so then
Doesn't
in
matter.
2004, we do Van Helsing, which I
Kicks
love.
ass.
I love it. It's so good. It's that perfect balance of camp and like legitimately good, fun, dramatic, sort of gothic monster storytelling. I like that basically everyone shows up in it. It's kind of like it's like the Avengers of this universe, but with like no setup, and it actually works somehow. Like Dracula's just there, so is a werewolf, so is the Wolfman or whatever, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde also there. Like it's like a team up movie, but with nothing preceding it, and somehow it works. It's honestly pretty effective. I
Yeah.
like that movie a lot. Then there's The
Frankenstein's
Mummy
monster
2.
is there, and he's actually the guy whoever's playing Frankenstein's monster in Van Helsing is really good. I like
Yeah.
him. I think that's probably my favorite depiction of Frankenstein's monster.
Continuing the remake era, in 2008, we have The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. And then we have The Scorpion King 2, Rise of a Warrior.
What? Wait, I've never heard of that.
You heard me. It appears that The Rock is not in that one. It looks like a bunch of people who are not famous at all. Oh, it's a direct to DVD sword and sorcery action adventure film prequel. It's a prequel to The Scorpion King,
Which is a
itself a
prequel to
prequel.
The Mummy too. Okay, great.
They're going in the right direction here. Then there's The Wolfman 2010 with the stacked cast but awful reviews. We mentioned that one. There's The Scorpion King 3, The Battle for Redemption, that has Billy
That
Zane, Ron Perlman in it.
okay.
It is the third installment in the Scorpion King series, which is, I guess, the fifth installment in the Mummy. No, sixth installment in the Mummy series. The Scorpion King 4, Quest for Power. Who could forget? Lou Ferrigno's in that, apparently.
Interesting.
Also direct to video. And lastly, in 2018, Scorpion King Book of Souls. that one,
I did
that
not
one,
realize that the Scorpion King has been going on this long. Some real
yes. And
staying power.
then we have what you might call the modern era, though I think some of these you might draw a line between. We have Dracula Untold in 2014. We have The Mummy, again, this time with Tom Cruise as a globe-trotting Indiana Jones type. Horrible casting. That was a fun mess, disaster, sort of ruined their entire rebooting of the franchise plans. We have Invisible Man 2020, which is like a wholly different, standing on its own, completely different thing with no real connection to the plans for the Mummy universe, as far as I can tell. We have Renfield, that like weird comedy with
Oh yeah,
Nicolas
with
Cage
Nick
as
Cage
Dracula.
as Dracula. Yeah.
All right. Also completely unrelated from any sort of connective plans. We have The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which is also completely disconnected from Renfield, as you might imagine. Also, The Last Voyage of the Demeter kind of sucked, unfortunately. I feel like it could have been really good, but it was not. Then we have Abigail, which is listed here as part of the
What?
same universe.
Oh,
Question mark?
Interesting.
I didn't realize. I know she's a vampire because they gave that away in the trailer, but um, she's not. How is that connected? Is she literally related to Dracula? Does Dracula's name come up?
No,
Is it
I
made by
don't.
Is
There's
it
a
made by Universal?
production companies Project X Entertainment, Vincent
Distributed
Films,
by Universal.
distributed by Universal, I guess. Yeah.
So fuck it, that counts, I guess. Is that how we're playing this one?
No, her father is Christophe Lazar.
Yeah,
Dracula's
okay.
never mentioned in that one. Like, yeah, I don't. That's weird.
Sure. I guess that's connected because it's just Universal. And then forthcoming, we have The Wolfman in 2025. And that's what I guess you could call loosely the Universal Monsters universe. What a mess.
Was Invisible Man 2020 on that list?
No.
Okay,
Oh, it
interesting.
was. I said that already.
Okay,
It is on the list.
I just must have missed it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's on the list. Obviously, Del Toro's Frankenstein will not be on the list because it's an adaptation of the book, not the 31 film, and it's not made by Universal. So that's maybe arguably the OG film cinematic universe in
I
all
think
its eras.
we can see the fate of the Marvel universe written in the stars. This is this how it's going to where it's going to get to? That eventually they'll take it and remake it with political agenda in mind. Who knows?
It seems like right now they're just like, well, we have these properties. We'll let people like Lee Winnell, who are financially proven horror people, kind of do whatever they want with them and make these relatively low budget standalone movies like The Invisible Man and The Wolf Man. Who knows? Maybe they'll do a creature from the Black Lagoon or the Swamp Creature, whatever the fuck it's called.
Yeah. Hey, you know,
I'd love it if someone else did it because I'm not
I'm not a huge fan of
his
him.
work.
I'd
But
like to see. I'm excited for Guillermo del Toro's. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see a
me too.
Dracula movie that doesn't have Keanu Reeves, that follows the book a little bit. You know, I think I'd like to see something
Yeah, I
like that.
really. I'm excited for you to finish reading the book because I quite like the book. I think it's good, and it's weird because you read it and you're like, I'm not sure how you would adapt this exactly. You can see how what's his name tried in the '90s.
Coppola, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, there are some great things in that movie, but there's some weak links, like Keanu Reeves, for example. But anyway, yes, that's a brief tour of the OG cinematic universe, with some
Yes.
two pretty decent movies and one horrible movie. What have we learned? One thing that I've learned is that bad movies have been with us forever.
Forever.
Um, it's interesting because I mentioned this to you before we did the stream, is that I'm not used to watching movies from the 30s and 40s that suck. Usually, if I'm watching a movie from the 30s and 40s, it's because it's pretty good and stood the test of time. So seeing a really bad movie from that time period is kind of interesting. I don't see that a lot. There's a lot of things here that are just classic bad movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Oh, I've
so
seen quite a few of them. I've experienced quite a few these past couple weeks, and I'm going to continue to experience quite a few. I
yeah.
think for when we cover Dracula, which I would like to do at some point, I will have seen Dracula's daughter by that point.
Great. People are mentioning Nosferatu. That's coming up. Yes,
Yes.
that would not be in this universe at all because it's not Dracula. It's Nosferatu. It's totally different. We swear. We changed the names and everything. Therefore, it's totally different. The differences between Dracula and Nosferatu are quite interesting, especially when it comes to, what would you say, vampire lore. Like, for example, Nosferatu is where we get the idea that they burn up in sunlight. Because
Yeah,
that does not
that is
happen
not
in
in the
Dracula
book.
the book. In the book, they can't turn into their full vampiric form, and they're just like normal human level of weakness and power when they're in the sunlight. But they don't die. But Nosferatu is like, yeah, they burn up in the sun. And it's like, actually, thematically, it's a pretty strong choice. I like it. Both can work, I would say.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting point of comparison because, as many people know, Nosferatu was an illegal adaptation of Dracula. They asked for permission, and Bram Stoker's estate was like, "Nope, you can't have it." And they're like, "Well, we're gonna do it anyway and change the names." And then they got sued, and the judge was like, "Yeah, you just stole it. You can't do that. I ordered the destruction of all copies of the film." And so they destroyed most of them, but one escaped to the magical land of America, where, due to a fluke, Dracula had already passed into copyright, into the public domain, because someone forgot to dot the I's on paperwork or something. And so the only existing copies of Nosferatu survived in America. That's the only reason we have it today. Pretty wild
Good
story.
for us.
Yes.
We did a good thing there because that's a fun movie. I like that. I'll probably rewatch that too before, our Dracula coverage. So I'm gonna be imbuing myself with a lot of these old Gothic horror tales, these classic Gothic horror stories for the months of September and October. I'm very excited. I'm having a great time so far, even with shitty ones.
God, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman sucked though. So if you're gonna make me watch any more of the bad ones, can they be campy and fun?
I will vet them first to make sure that they are campy
The bad
and
ones,
or fun.
anyway.
The bad ones, yeah. I mean, you're gonna
I'll watch
have to
the
watch the
OGs.
Bela Lugosi Dracula
Oh,
because
that's fine. I would like to.
yeah,
That's fine with me. So that's the gist. Do you have any concluding thoughts on these three films?
I don't think that the Frankenstein story has been done yet in a way that I would find like satisfying to the spirit of the novel. And to the good parts of the spirit of the novel, right? Like, 'cause there's some boring shit in the novel too. Like there's some moments where I'm like, I don't need to hear the backstory of the people that he's trying to model himself off of. I don't need to hear all their backstory. I don't need this subplot about a Turkish guy who got thrown in jail falsely, and then somebody tried to free him, and he promised that guy his daughter if he would help him, even though he was already going to help him. And then I don't need any of that, but I do like a lot of what it's doing. I just kind of wish that this is why I think I'm excited for Guillermo del Toro's, right? Is because I'd like to see somebody sort of grasp the fact that the monster is not without fault in this situation. I think that's one of the most powerful parts of the story, is that if you're reading it, you're like, the monster, I don't think you're invited to believe the monster is entirely innocent of the action, right?
Oh, fuck no.
And I would like that to become a little bit more prominent in adaptations. But
I agree. I think the best version of Frankenstein, as far as I know, is yet to be made.
yes,
Like the maximally compelling version of Frankenstein hasn't been made yet. I think Guillermo del Toro, if he's going to stick closer to the best of the book, could do a good job. My worry for him is that he has this obsession with like outsider figures who are just misunderstood, that he'll lean a bit too hard in that direction in trying to sympathize with the monster. That's my concern for him. Hopefully he can, thread the needle on that, stay the course.
hopefully. Although if I
justice.
had to guess based on everything else that he's made, it's going to be more like Shape of Water than it is, the gothic horror Frankenstein. But
maybe he'll at least, as someone mentioned, he at least has style.
I agree. I like
he can,
what he's. I'm sure he's going to do some cool visuals, at the very least.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I think that'll be good. I'm looking forward to that. That's a movie that I really hope he can nail, because the idea of Frankenstein clearly lingers in our culture, and people like it and find it compelling it and remember it. And you could ask almost anyone on the street to tell you the bare bones version of the Frankenstein story, and they'd know it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's simple and effective. I just think the best execution of it in film form just hasn't happened yet. I'm watching this movie, I was like, oh, this is okay, but it's not really what I imagined in my head. It's not really as good as it could be, but it's still enjoyable. People are talking about the Hammer campy horror movies in the 60s and 70s. I think we'll definitely check those out at some point in the future. And yeah, The Wolfman was just a pretty solid little werewolf movie.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily super invested in any continuation of The Wolfman specifically. I like werewolf movies and I'd like to see more of them. So I'll give The Wolfman 2025 a shot, but I'm not especially like, oh, I can't wait to see more of Larry Talbot specifically, you know?
Yeah. I agree with that. I'm interested to see what he does with the Wolfman. Because the Invisible Man is another one, right? That like I really like that. There's some charm to that idea. I remember really like. So I've never read the actual book. I've read the Great Illustrated Classics adaptation a bunch of times when I was a kid. But there's something about that story too that just like clearly it sticks with people, right? Like some of these ones, these older sci-fi gothic horror movie or stories really stick with people, and like the kernel of the idea behind them, right, really
Yeah.
whole like takes root. And there's a reason why they're remaking the Invisible Man in 2020 or the Wolf Man in 2025 or Frankenstein, right? So I'm excited to see what he decides to do with the Wolfman. Wasn't a huge fan of what he did with the Invisible Man, but it works to some degree. Clearly, otherwise it probably wouldn't as much money as it did. So yeah, I'm interested to see where they go moving forward. But I would like to see. I'd like to see somebody take them and do them. Like do them pretty well because I
Do
still
them
don't think,
justice.
yeah, do them
Yes.
justice. And you know what else I'd like to see? I'd like to see a Van Helsing, extended universe thing that actually takes off because I think that has a lot of potential too. You know, I think
Yeah.
that, like the movies themselves maybe didn't do it right, but like the Mummy with Brendan Fraser, that is a very well thought of film, at least the first one and the second one. Van Helsing, I love that movie. The idea behind A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is not awful. I think that's like sort of an Avengers version of these stories, right? Like that one has Dracula and
Yeah.
Dorian Gray and the Invisible Man and Captain Nemo and all
Why
that.
would you why would you put Dorian Gray in this universe? That one makes no sense to me at
Because
all. Get him out of
it's
there.
a magic painting, JB. It's evil.
It's like Harley Quinn in the first Suicide Squad, just going around with the bat while everyone else has these crazy powers. It's like, what are you doing in there? Like, get out of there. You don't belong here.
Yeah, like the idea behind the movie League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is pretty cool. I like the comic. I've never read the comic book, but I'd probably be interested because Alan Moore is an interesting guy. But yeah, no, I'd like to see some more of this stuff start to make a little bit of a comeback because I think these stories are really strong, and like the Frankenstein novel is very like apart from some of the boring shit, it's really good. I really am enjoying it. I'm excited to get back to the Invisible Man. I remember really loving Dracula when I read it, and I'm gonna be really excited to dive into that these next couple weeks. So I'm, like I hope that these start to sort of like
If
see
we get
some
good
see some
versions of them.
yeah
Yeah.
good see some good adaptations come about because I
Or
think that
just
they deserve it.
more things like it. It doesn't
Yeah,
even necessarily need to be Frankenstein, but the general idea of the story could be borrowed however you want. It's all public domain. Same with werewolves. No one's got a copyright hold on werewolves, so have at it. Let's get some good werewolf movies, for example. Things like that. I always like werewolves and vampires and stuff like that, especially. I'm always interested in seeing more of that sort of stuff. Because someone asked, "What's the last great werewolf movie?" And like that's a tough question for me. The last one that, because I haven't seen some of these ones. Someone's mentioned Wolf with Jack Nicholson, and there's that Wolf Man from 2010, and there's a whole bunch of them that I'm forgetting. I'm sure. The last for me great one was American Werewolf in London. I think that's a great movie. Um,
yeah.
the last one of the last werewolf movies I saw before The Wolfman was called The Wolf of Snow Hollow, and fuck that movie.
Oh, I have a copy of that actually. I found it because I really liked that guy's first movie.
Well, that guy is funny, and there's some good stuff in the movie, but holy shit, the twist is horrendous. I'm going to spoil it because I don't think you should. So if you don't want to hear a spoiler for The Wolf of Snow Hollow, shut up your ears for 5 seconds because I'm about to spoil it. The twist is that there is no wolf. It's
What?
just a guy killing
Oh,
people.
that's lame.
Yes, it is. It
Ooh.
is so lame, and he thinks he's making a point about human nature. It's terrible. It's
No, see
insufferable.
the Wolf Man did that already, dude. They already made the point.
Yeah, all werewolf stories already make that point. Yeah, it's terrible. I hate that twist. Anyway,
And speaking of that, Teen Wolf. What a movie. There, maybe
I
that's the last great werewolf movie, right, Jamie? Am I right? He plays
think you're right.
basketball.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. He should have like Teen Wolf meets Airbud.
Oh my God! Wait, yeah, real dogs versus trans dogs. That'd be something.
Well, that concludes our discussion of these three movies today. Next week, we do know what we're going to be talking about next week for once. Next week will be Fantasia and Dumbo, right?
Indeed.
All right, continuing the 2D animated, theatrically released Disney animated films. So we're going to be talking about Fantasia and Dumbo. We're doubling up because Fantasia's a little light on story, but we're
Yeah.
still going to give it its fair shake and give it its time in the spotlight. And we're going to continue that, and then we'll keep talking about new things as they come out and as they interest us. Not a lot of things out in theaters right now that I'm particularly interested in. Like,
Same.
so,
I've been looking. I have found nothing.
so we'll keep covering new things as they come out if they look any good at all. In the meantime, let's watch some old movies and talk about them. Thanks very much for joining us in the chat and all the lively conversation. We appreciate it. Thanks for telling us about epistolary literary devices. I feel like we all learned something valuable here today. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And unless Hugh, you have anything else to add?
I think we're good. Keep behaving, and your chats will still show up on screen.
Yes, if you are good.
Live halal, and you'll be fine.
All right. Goodbye.
Goodbye,
God
everybody.
be with you. Watch out for werewolves.
he just he just